So good afternoon. Let's make a start. So I'd like to begin today by welcoming those members of the public and press who have joined us today. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures or share on social media during the meeting. Please, can everyone present turn their phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, I'll adjourn the meeting and we'll leave the room by the side doors and use the external fire exit to assemble at the point in the car park. I'd just like to remind everyone present at this meeting that it will be live streamed and a recording will be placed on the council's website. The meeting will be adjourned every 2 hours for a short comfort break if we get to that point. Turning to item 1, apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Could we just have an update on any apologies for absence?
Apologies received from Councillor Detter, substituted by Councillor Levine.
Thank you very much. And does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no hands, so we'll take that as no one having anything to declare. But obviously, if anything comes up during the meeting, it's always possible to make a declaration later on. Turning to the minutes, please note that Councillor Charlotte Lowe has not been included in the attendance in the minutes circulated, but this has been corrected. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 10th of March 2026 as an accurate record. Does everyone agree? Or more accurately, does anyone disagree? Councillor Goodliffe.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at minute 54, it states that officers explained that the Department of Work and Pensions had confirmed that authorities, and goes on to say, may not use Crisis and Resilience Fund. However, since I've now had information through the Freedom of Information I had to give, the County Council had an email from the Department of Work and Pensions on the 16th of January, which notes may or may not be done through blanket free school meal voucher schemes. The Department Council also had an email from the Department of Work and Pensions on the 19th of January, which the supporting documents say may or may not be through the blanket provision of vouchers. And the County Council had a meeting with the Department of Work and Pensions on the 19th of February on slide 194. The CRF guidance does not prohibit the use of vouchers to support families with children eligible for free school meals. It is up to local authorities' discretion. An email from the Department of Work and Pensions on the 27th of February on page 179 says that Crisis and Resilience Fund guidance does not prohibit the use of vouchers to support families with children eligible for free school meals. It is up to local authority discretion. And further to that, a written question to the Department of Work and Pension was replied to by Dame Diana Johnson, and that states that local authorities have discretion to design their own schemes within the Crisis and Resilience Fund guidance, and that this can include supporting families eligible for free school meals during the school holidays. This may or may not be through the blanket provision of vouchers to those on free school meals. Whilst I admit that what is written here was said during the meeting, I did not have this information at that point because though I requested it ahead of that meeting, I was told I could only have it through an FOI process.
Thank you. Well, that's interesting, the points that you raise, but we are strictly speaking looking at the accuracy of what was said. And perhaps there's another way of raising those issues at some other point.
Well, the accuracy of what was said is inaccurate, as these FOI requests have.
No, but it's the accuracy of what was. It's whether what's written here is what was said, and you've said yourself. You've kindly said that you do appreciate this is what was said. So I'm going to take it that these minutes do represent what was said at the meeting. Are there any other points? No. Thank you. So those minutes will be approved as they accurately reflect what was said at the meeting, and I will sign them. An updated minutes action log was included in the published papers. Are there any questions on that? No, thank you very much. I will take the minutes action log as noted. In terms of public questions and petitions, we have no petitions or public questions today. So we'll move on to item 4, the Healthy Child Programme Section 75 contract extension. This report will be introduced by Richard Merrick, Interim Consultant in Public Health, and Helen Freeman, Public Health Principal. Bearing in mind, we have had a report about the Healthy Child Programme already, and this had a sort of helpful update. This is about the extension. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. So I'm just going to give a very brief overview of the paper that you've already seen, and then look forward to your comments and questions afterwards. So this paper follows on from the paper that came to committee in October 2024, where approval was granted to enter into a Section 75 partnering agreement with Cambridgeshire Community Services NHS Trust for the delivery of an integrated Healthy Child Programme. An approval was granted for a 6-year period with in the shape of a 2+2+2 arrangement, and a report on progress to committee was requested before the option to extend for those second 2 years. And so this report provides that update in terms of key performance indicators and other areas of service development in order to inform that decision to approve the extension. And so in the paper, we set out performance data for key performance indicators for mandated contacts, which all show improving and good levels of performance, and also the wider contribution the service makes to important health and developmental outcomes for children, including good level of development at the age of 5. And while the performance data focuses on the breadth of the universal offer of the programme, we've also included some case studies in the appendix, which really, I think, gives some insight into the depth of the targeted and specialist work that the programme does and the impact that has on children and families in Cambridgeshire. The provider is highly engaged in a range of service improvement activities in collaboration with public health and with other parts of the council, with a focus very much on improving service delivery and key outcomes for children from low-income families. The service continues to be a highly valued system partner, contributing to our Best Start in Life programme, the development of our Best Start Family Hubs offer locally, and our Families First Cambridgeshire programme as well. The service has addressed what were long-standing recruitment challenges to specialist roles within the service through a workforce plan and a new skill mix model. And this has led to a fully staffed health visiting pathway, which we think is a real strength. The district-based service model and the fact that the service is integrated across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, although commissioned separately, will support new arrangements going forwards following local government reorganisation. We think that seeking any alternative arrangements for this service at this moment in time would present a number of significant risks for service delivery and particularly around staffing capacity. And taking that together, the report therefore recommends approving this extension. And I welcome any comments and questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or matters of debate? Councillor Goodliff.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the 2.5 year check information, obviously that's a very important milestone for children, but also there's then quite a big gap until 5 years when the next kind of thing is, and in that in between time we have school, and school readiness is obviously a very hot topic currently, and very important. Can you let us know what sort of information you give to families at that point? I know we can't possibly fit in another visit with the staffing that we have, but what sort of information is given to families at that point? And I also wanted to mention the case study, the Care of Next Infant programme. As someone who's been through child loss, it looks like an amazing programme, and I really wanted to state that I appreciate the thought and the dedication that goes into that programme. I think the case study described it very well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And I'm sorry that's something you had to experience. So in terms of the 2.5 year health and development check, that sits alongside other progress checks that our early years colleagues will do in settings. And in terms of what information and advice is given, it will probably be as different as every child. So those checks are based around something called the Ages and Stages questionnaire, which is a developmental questionnaire. Depending on what comes from that will depend on the focus. It also sits alongside health information. So in there, there'll also be things like a check-in around how you're getting on in terms of some of those kind of physical aspects. That might be around toilet training. And we know there's a lot talked about in terms of school readiness around kind of being ready in that terms of that. We know that we do a lot of kind of follow-on work from the 2.5 year check for those families where that's something that they're struggling with. There'll also be a check-in around kind of how eating is going, how growth is looking. Children are weighed at that development check as well, just to make sure those health indicators are right. For some families who have additional kind of issues going on for them, there could be a conversation from anything as broad as housing, domestic abuse, support around kind of poverty. And then obviously stuff to do with child development. So speech and language is a big area that they'll be looking at. Our provider is also the local provider for our speech and language services. So that kind of interplay between the health visiting offer and the speech and language specialist offer is really easy for us locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for the report. It's a wonderful insight, and actually took me back to the October report, which I then went back and had a read on it. What I'm about to say is more for feedback than anything, because I'm very supportive of what's going on with this. As a member looking at this, it doesn't tell us anything about achievements and what the case studies read well, but there's no collective, we were at this point, we're at that point. Now, is that because it's difficult to measure, or is something we don't measure? I'm just curious as to see, you know, it's a big investment. I'm totally behind it. I think we should be doing it. But I'm just wondering how we're actually quantifying what the return on that investment is for the council.
I welcome that comment and feedback. And I think there are elements here where we show performance, and I think you're sort of leaning more towards those kind of outcomes that we want to see. And again, there's a reflection of that in these longer term outcomes, as mentioned, in terms of school readiness or good level of development. I think we could certainly show more what happens in between in terms of how we help kind of drive progress through the programme with an annual development plan, in terms of some of the kind of building blocks from a service provision point of view. In terms of that return on investment question, I think that would be, we'd have to think in broader terms, and I would welcome any feedback on what you would like to see on that front.
Ken, Chair. I'm glad you accepted it as a challenge, because I meant it as a challenge. And as I say, I think the programme itself is worthy. But maybe there's something you want to go away and have a think about, and perhaps come back to us through the chair and whatnot, as to how we could look at, or how we could better understand what we are getting for this. Please don't take this in a negative way, right? It's very easy to write about the apple pie and motherhood side of things here, but what are the cold hard facts? How many people have we helped in this situation, and that, and this, that, and that I found was missing from the report, but it didn't really detract from it, other than understanding, if we were really cold hearted, where's our bang for our buck on this? Thank you.
You okay if I add? So just adding to that point, I think it is a challenging service to show kind of those outcomes for a large number of people we see. Thankfully, when we go and do those checks in the home and we offer advice, there may not necessarily be a follow-up piece of work. But the Healthy Child programme also works at a targeted and a specialist level. So there are caseloads of families who have identified needs that there'll be ongoing work with. And over the last 6 months, all of the different strands of a Healthy Child programme have introduced something called goal-based outcomes, where they're able to kind of have a better way of measuring outcomes at that targeted and specialist level where they're doing ongoing work. So hopefully something reporting around that might be helpful moving forward.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Lowe.
Thank you. Just more curiosity, do you work closely with any of the other charitable organisations? Because obviously been telling my parish councils about the Learning Together, which have got the advice and support for parents with under 5-year-olds. I was just wondering whether you work sort of together and send people towards the other organisations.
Absolutely, we do. So the Healthy Child programme, alongside various other services delivered by the council, are key kind of partners together around the Best Start in Life work, and our voluntary community sector are absolutely key to that partnership moving forward. So examples would be the Healthy Child programme have an infant feeding team that are currently working towards their Gold Baby Friendly accreditation. As part of that, they have to provide kind of system leadership, and they work really closely with voluntary sector organisations like the NCT, Cambridge Breastfeeding Alliance, La Lèche, in order to kind of offer that specialist support to our voluntary sector partners. They will work really closely with local groups that might support parents with particular SEND needs, so local kind of like Down syndrome associations, etc. Although it's a high value contract and it's got a large staff team, there is no way that the support that the families need could be given by just the health visitors themselves. So they really value those links they have with local community and voluntary organisations.
Thank you. Councillor Beckett.
Thank you. In section 4.3.4, there's a graph that shows the difference between England, East of England, and Cambridgeshire 2 to 2.5 year health reviews. I'm just wondering what it is that makes the massive drop in the East of England figures against the Cambridgeshire, and what Cambridge has done to be able to stay ahead of that, if it's a larger trend, or have I missed something that major that happened in that year, which I acknowledge could be the case.
We actually had this exact conversation earlier just to make sure that we were clear exactly what had happened. We believe that what is being shown in that graph is there were a couple of local authorities in the Eastern region who changed their delivery model when it came to the 2.5 year check, because they wanted to trial a different approach by delaying that check to be doing that check slightly later at age 3. That meant that for a couple of local authorities, their performance really changed significantly and quickly, and that had an impact on the Eastern region overall level. Though there's new guidance that has come out just a few months ago around the Healthy Child programme, which makes it a lot clearer to all local authorities exactly how they should be doing each of those checks, and it's doubled down on the kind of the timescales that we work to here in Cambridgeshire. So you'll see that that started to come up as other local authorities have moved back to the same timescales. So I'm pretty sure that nothing else happened. I go to regional meetings, and obviously there wasn't a big collapse in any other places. So I think it was around a couple of local authorities changing the timescales of those checks, which meant that the overall Eastern region looked lower.
Thank you very much. Any other? I've got Councillor Sidler and then Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this report. I welcome the focus on getting children ready for school, because from going to around my local primary schools, one of the main things the teachers say is, where they're getting a lot of children coming in that are not ready to actually learn, and it causes a lot of disruption, and slows down the learning of everybody within those settings. And the focus on the children from less wealthy backgrounds is good, but there doesn't seem to be much of a breakdown of the other demographics, especially considering there was the equality assessment back a couple of years ago, and there doesn't seem to be any, again, quantifiable data broken down into those different demographics. It said it was going to prioritize them, but how and what are the outcomes? And then secondly, we know that there are areas of Cambridgeshire that are much more affluent than others. Do you have any data on regional differences within Cambridgeshire itself, rather than comparing Cambridgeshire, which is very disparate, against just the east of England? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really important questions. So in terms of work that we've done and work that we're taking forward, we are working very closely with the provider to routinely get a detailed data extract, which is going to enable us to look in much more detail where the data is captured about other protected characteristics or other population groups that we would be interested in from an inequalities point of view, to enable us to much more sort of rigorously monitor, for example, who is or isn't taking up the offer of mandated checks, but to really focus in on other dimensions of inequality aside from low income status. And alongside that, there is detailed work underway to really sort of drill down on, again, within Cambridgeshire, one of the things we see is that there are pockets of lower income families in some of those more affluent areas. And we see certainly in some of the higher level data in terms of school readiness that often those children are more disadvantaged than if they were in another area where the average was less affluent. So again, sort of being mindful of that, and in terms of identifying and prioritizing those families for extra support, that's one of the areas that we're really focusing on at the moment. So I hope that sort of speaks to your question.
It does, but what steps would you make to quantify that, to actually show us at the next report that that not only are we making those prioritizations, but we're showing that it's making a difference?
So we carried out an equity audit recently, and what that showed us, that actually the reach of the Healthy Child programme was broadly pretty equitable. There were a few areas where there were slight differences, and those have been fed back to the provider, but on very small populations. So we saw a slight area of inequalities in terms of access around a couple of ethnic groups, which they're kind of coming back and kind of re-looking at this year. We saw a small kind of inequity around some of the younger parents, so they're making sure that they're looking at that this year. The reason the report particularly looks at low-income families is, although there were slight differences in equity in some of those other groups that we took the information in on, that was a lot less than the large amount of inequity we see around income. So we know that the data that comes in around good level of development at 5 shows around a 30% difference in terms of our good level of development overall compared to our children on free school meals. So although we're not acting on those areas of inequalities we've seen in other places, we've realised that actually the focus needs to be particularly on income. We have recently, as you'll be aware, kind of been able to look at how we could use a low income tracker commissioned with local districts to be able to be a lot better at identifying those families and being able to kind of put support around them. We're working at the moment with the colleagues who are looking after the Crisis and Resilience Fund and LIFT to understand how we can really link that in with our work in the Healthy Child programme. So although absolutely, I totally get your point around those areas of inequality, when we looked at it in detail through an inequality lens, what swamped out the other areas was absolutely the differences related to income. And as Richard said, that being something which we're seeing in all parts of Cambridgeshire. So we're not looking at an approach which just looks at this from a which one of our LSOAs is particularly deprived. We're looking in every community to say, where can we find these families that we know are struggling, because we know those are the children who are less likely to do well when they get to school.
Thank you.
Do you mind?
Go on then.
I just wanted to ask if you're identifying any specific things within those groups which are leading the children to be less ready for school. Is that okay?
And that is the absolutely perfect question that we are at the moment asking our colleagues who are doing research to particularly look at, because we're wanting to know, is it all to do with income? So are we looking at an income maximisation kind of focus? Do we need to be looking at what is the makeup of that family? Are we looking at single parent households or households where there is some kind of disability either amongst the parents or the children? And we're really interested in skills. So is that something we need to look at? Do we need to look at the skill level of the parents? But we're starting some research work on that at the moment to sit alongside the piece of work we're doing on poverty, because you're absolutely right. Not only do we need to identify the families, we need to understand what it is particularly that is causing that to be an issue for their children and how we can best support. So yeah, great question.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. I'm going to touch more on some governance side of what we've got in front of us rather than the service itself, because I think that's also important. The first one is around the merger. I just want to get some reassurance that you're confident that the merger is going to still have the level of local accountability that we need for such a service, not just for you as officers, but also us as councillors. We're seeing across the country, there's a lot of mergers going on, whether it's local government reorganisation, whether it's the ICB, whether it's the police forces. There's a lot of this happening, and there is a concern about local accountability. At the moment, within my day job, if I needed to get hold of someone at Cambridgeshire Constabulary at a very senior level, I could fairly quickly. But if they all merge together, am I still going to have that level of access? Probably not. So I just want to make sure that you're reassured that there's going to be the governance structure in place to be able to raise serious concerns very quickly to the top of this new organisation so that they can be rectified. And then the second point is about LGR and the 2+2+2. Obviously, with this extension, the next extension will have to take place almost from day one of the new organisations being set up post LGR. Are we confident that the work streams are happening behind the scenes with the chief execs and with Peterborough City Council to ensure that the new council, whatever they decide to make in the first year after elections, they're able to act very quickly, and it's going to leave all of our children, keeps us safe and legal essentially, and keeps all of our children safe going into 28-29, where it's going to be a very, very turbulent period for local government. I don't want this to fall behind, because it's extremely important for our children.
Thank you. Really important questions. I think our impression is that for the first question from the government side, in terms of the leadership for this program, everyone remains the same who we have worked with for a number of years. There is no kind of the fact that there's two organisations emerging in many respects isn't affecting us in any way, shape or form from the point of view of this service. I think most of the changes are more at a senior and perhaps sort of, back office rather than frontline function level. So from that point of view, we don't have any concerns of impact for us to work with the service. And as you say, in terms of anything to do with escalating concerns or addressing any issues, essentially nothing has changed from our perspective. So hopefully that provides reassurance on that front. In terms of the LGR question, just to clarify on the timescales, so the contract extension, the +2 we're talking about today, is to start from April 2027. And so then the subsequent +2 would be to start from April 2029, which potentially allays some of those fears that we're not talking about sort of that changeover happening in 2028. Again, I think, as sort of mentioned in the report, compared to a number of other sort of hypotheticals of where we might be at this point in time with the provision of this service, the fact that we have one provider providing an integrated service across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough with that service configured on a district basis, I think that does put us in a very strong position that maintaining the status quo, again, providing that all the things that matter are going in the right direction in terms of performance and assurances and so on and so forth, I think carrying on seeing out the 6-year period as hoped would ensure that kind of that continuity. And again, however local government reorganisation pans out in terms of number of unitaries and geography of unitaries for Cambridge and Peterborough.
Thank you very much. Councillor Beckett.
Councillor Martin got in there before me on this one, actually, because the merger did worry me a tiny bit. My experience of commercial kind of mergers leads me to think that there are usually operational challenges as a result of these kind of things, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So were any risks identified as part of this merger that's going on? And could you explain, if that's the case, why there's sort of no potential for interruption on operations on the ground?
So the two trusts have been working together as a single entity for the last year in kind of shadow form, and it's been it's only from this April that it's just been formalised. What we've actually seen is a little bit of an improvement, I guess, in terms of being able to look at that locally. So there were some of the kind of service directors had portfolios across Cambridgeshire, Peterborough and Norfolk. We now have ones that just sit within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So actually from a localising point of view, that's actually been a little bit of a win for us. The chief exec of the new trust is the same chief exec of the trust we've been working with for a long time. So we haven't seen any particular changes. As Richard said, a lot of the changes have been around some of the corporate and back office functions. That has led to us actually seeing a slight reduction in terms of some of the overhead costs. As a bigger organisation, have been able to kind of make some efficiencies behind the scenes, which has allowed us to kind of shift a bit more, small amounts, but a bit more funding into frontline. So, and because they have been operating like that for a year, we haven't seen anything that's caused us concern in that time. So we're quite confident that there shouldn't be any surprises moving forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Manning.
I appreciate what I'm about to ask might be more a question for government. So please you say it is, but I was just reading the good level development stuff. I was reading the gov.uk site, and it specifically says that recently academised schools aren't included in any of this. Do you have any handle on why that is? Or is that something to follow up afterwards? And he doesn't define what recently means in this context either.
That is something I don't know about, and maybe my education colleagues behind me might know a bit more. But I'm afraid I know that the good level of development at 5 has really strong coverage. It's we get information from all of our schools locally, so that would surprise me. It seems a very robust measure, but my learned colleagues behind me may very well be able to give you more information.
Thank you. Are there any other topics that people want to either question about or raise as it were a debate item? No? Thank you very much indeed for the report. Can we move please now to consider the recommendations? Is everyone happy for these recommendations to be taken together? Yep. In which case, those in favour of the recommendations, please raise your hand. It's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the excellent report.
Thank you.
So our next item is the Inclusion for All Area SEND Action Plan report. This is Sarah Callahan, Michael Bateman. Who are going to introduce this report. Sarah Callahan, the Service Director for Education, Michael Bateman, the Assistant Director for Inclusion. This is, as everyone will have seen, this is a really broad paper. It covers many different types of information. Some of it is background, some of it is information about performance indicators, some of it is progress against plans, some of it is specifically about the reforms and the policy development around SEND in particular, some of it is to do with our response to those reforms. So what I am asking, please, is when you introduce the report, maybe we could break it up into different types of topic, because this could easily have been several different papers, in fact. And then we can perhaps have questions and discussion about different areas and then the thing overall as well. So if I could hand over to you, please, Sarah.
Thank you very much. And I will just go off agenda and just respond to that last comment. The early years profile score does apply to all schools, including academies. It's only independent schools that it doesn't apply to. So it is a statutory requirement. But I'll move on to the report. So this report brings together the latest programme on the Inclusion for All programme, with a particular thematic focus on how we're expanding local provision to provide sufficient places for children with additional needs under the Inclusive Places work strand of Inclusion for All, which is our agreed improvement framework. It also includes an update on the experience of how we're improving the experience for children and families following the 2024 Ofsted CQC inspection. And the report provides assurance that the Area SEND Action Plan in response to that inspection is being delivered and starting to evidence improvement. It also demonstrates how the system is shifting towards earlier intervention, stronger inclusion and better outcomes in line with our agreed Inclusion for All framework and the publication of the DFE white paper, Every Child Achieving and Thriving, that was published on February 23rd. There is a lot of information within this report, and in line with previous committees, we focused on a thematic area. On this occasion, we focused on inclusive places. But to put that in context, we will also cover timeliness of our EHC education, health and care plans, the focus on inclusive places and meeting our sufficiency duties, and also the national context, i.e. the detail within the white paper, Every Child Achieving and Thriving, and how we intend to meet the DFE prescribed timelines for submitting our SEND reform plan in response to that. Given the scale and breadth of information within this report, we propose, with the support of our Chair and Vice Chair, that in advance of the SEND reform plan submission to the DFE in June, we arrange a meeting with all elected members to go through this in more detail to inform our refreshed plan. And to give sufficient time to do justice to each area of focus within the report, Michael's going to take us through the key messages for each of these areas. And as you've suggested, we will pause after each section to take questions. So in summary, committee is asked to note the progress set out in this report and continue to provide robust oversight as we deliver the next stages of the Area SEND Action Plan in context of the government white paper that aligns well with our agreed Inclusion for All framework. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Afternoon, everyone. So regarding the first sort of main section in 3.2 within the report, we were here last October with the first sort of set piece position statement regarding Inclusion for All, and we set out the EHCP information then. I think just what I want to draw attention to in this section initially is just a reminder that the data that we collect on education, health and care plan completion of plans within 20 weeks is one of those key headline piece of information for the DFE. It's collected on a calendar year basis, so sometimes if you hear me talking about those quarters, it's in the calendar year, and of course we can't help but think about the terms as well. So if I refer particularly to the end of last calendar year, the autumn term, that was Q4 in terms of how the DFE look at this data. So I just draw attention to that first of all, because the table that we've set out in the report is quite important in that context. We know that we had a big improvement area around education, health and care plan, everything from performance, quality assurance, etc. It was highlighted in our self-evaluation before the Ofsted inspection this time last year. And not surprisingly, it was one of the 5 main areas for improvement. And that's why, quite rightly, we're focusing on that. And I'm sure at future reports, we'll need to look at this iteratively, because there's lots of different ways that you can look at this information. The headline performance data is obviously important. It was set out in the October report that we had a figure of trying to achieve 70% of plans in time for many, many years in the county. And obviously performance for many years had been below that. So it was set out in October that we would set a realistic target for 2026 of 20% of plans in time. And that in the context that just under 9% had been completed in that time when Ofsted were here. And then moving next year in 2027, at the end of 2027, to try to get to the national average, currently around 46%. So I think those figures are important because we had been at that just under 9%. We completed the whole of the cumulative year for 2025 at that same level, literally identical when you compare 2024 and 2025. However, we talked in the October report about some green shoots that were starting to appear with the additional investment that had been agreed, the one-off funding, and also changes to how we were working. And we finished the last 3 months of 2025 with an average of 22% of plans done in time. And we have started this year, the first 3 months, with an average of 18%. So on track to achieve that 20% at the end of this year. The only other thing I wanted to pull out in this first section was the information around phase transfer. And it's something that's not always commented on. It's something that's really important, but the way the DFE collect and publish national information, they don't publish it in quite the same way. But it's really important because each year by February the 15th, we have to try to complete those assessments, those annual reviews, those phase transfer reviews for children transferring from primary school to secondary. And then by the end of March, a similar process for those young people moving on from school into post-16 provision. Really important for those young people, for their families and the schools that will be receiving them, or the colleges that is done. So we've set out in the report that around 45% of those we managed to do before those 2 deadlines. So I think if we take that in the context of our performance overall, it's the same teams working on those as working on the other parts of EHC assessments. So we're continuing to see some of that steady progress, but we will not make that comment in any way that suggests complacency. There's a lot to do. You can see the backlog is still large, and we need to tackle that. So I won't overplay that, but we are continuing the progress that we set out in October.
Thank you. So questions for Michael. First, Councillor Goodliffe.
Thank you. I've got 3, if that's all right, Chair. First of all, in 3.2.12, it states backlog cases, over 1,000 cases waiting over 52 weeks. To put that in context, that's over 1,000 children waiting over a year. Can you give us an idea, while they're even waiting for an assessment, what support we're giving those children, young people, their parents and their schools while they're waiting that time? Secondly, high needs capital
Could I
allocation.
just there? Do you want to take one question at a time? Would that make a lot more sense? To perhaps just deal with the first one and then move on. Is that all right? Thank you.
Yes, so in the vast majority of circumstances, whilst children are going through an EHCP assessment, and this is true whether we're doing them in time or we are late, the duty still falls on schools to be providing that support. And I usually say schools in the general sense. Most of these are in that school age population, but there would be some nuances around that for early years settings and for a much smaller cohort post 16. But the bulk of that, those young people, those children waiting, are in that core school age group. So schools are required to use their delegated funding to provide that support, in addition to support, advice and guidance from some of the free at the point of delivery services that we provide. So that is ongoing. It is fair to say that it's stretching a point, isn't it, to say that that is standard, that's business as usual for children who are first being referred and progressing through the 20-week process. It is a theme with our feedback with schools at the moment about the difficulties around that. So this term we will be setting out, actually by the end of this month, we'll be setting out for schools guidance around how we can look to alleviate that with some access to funding for those cases, looking at particular schools where there are particular risk factors around the children and or the cohort that they have. So we are recognising that if we were issuing in time, schools would be getting that support earlier. So the majority of children do have that access, but I won't pretend that that's not an issue. It's certainly been flagged by schools to us as something that we need to look to address.
Thank you. Following on from that, I've been contacted by a number of schools and an academy trust who are reporting delays in funding payments for children with EHCPs, which does add up to huge issues with them being able to deliver that education. Do you know how many different cases where we have a backlog in funding for those schools, and when those schools and trust can expect those payments to be made, please?
I'm imagining that that feedback that you're getting is a combination of factors. So I should think it's a general point, as I was alluding to, that schools feel that if the plans had been issued on time, they know on average the kind of funding allocations that are made, so they can determine how that backlog is impacting on them. There have been some schools this year, whilst we've been trialling different approaches leading to this proposal I just briefly set out, to provide some funding to some schools in certain circumstances where we'd been providing some commitments and allocation of funding. And yes, there had been some schools where there was a delay between the decision in principle around the funding that we were doing and then the actual sort of transaction. And those have all been resolved, my understanding is, before the end of the financial year. So I think that those particular ones have been resolved. But I think the broader point that's being made, because we get this from a number of schools, is it's quite straightforward for them to carry out the calculation. They know on average when we issue an EHCP for the children in their school with different profiles, the kind of funding that would be provided. And therefore they're able to work out, if those were late by another term, it's X pounds and pence. And that's the bit we're trying to look to address. But I do need to just clarify what I said in terms of it won't be all schools for 100% of funding in 100% of circumstances. And that's the guidance we want to set out schools by the end of the month. So it's clear about that.
Thank you. And I know we have an increase in the capital allocation for high needs of over 1.5 million this year. What differences will we see, and how will these funds be used to assist schools and nurseries to become inclusive? And particularly, are we looking at rolling out the ERB type areas into secondary schools rather than keeping it to primaries?
Yeah, so I know we're going to touch on this possibly when we get to other parts of the report, but I'll just cover that briefly to say that the current allocations that we've got are supporting the enhanced resource base provisions. There are other parts of the grant that allow minor adaptations, which really help with that whole reasonable adjustments duty that we and schools have between us. And I think that's a particularly really helpful way, because sometimes we understandably, we mentioned in the report about the new special schools and the large set piece provisions, but often it is the smaller amounts of money that just enable adaptations to be made to schools, so that they can have that anticipatory duty about other children coming through to be more inclusive. So I know that those kind of capital developments would occur. Regarding secondary, we've set out very briefly in the paper the fact that we are awaiting further clarity from the DfE around the larger funding allocations. We did get that published since the report was drafted, so in recent weeks, and we're looking at the detail of that. That's the headline figure that DfE have talked about, £3 billion nationally and 60,000 places for those new inclusion provisions. One line in the SEND reforms talks about all secondary schools having such inclusion bases, and a corresponding, I think the word is a corresponding number in feeder primary schools. So we're working through the detail. We know that we want to provide members with further details. We look at that with our sufficiency planning. But if we align that to the national direction, the ambition is over the next 3 years, as that capital money flows, for all secondary schools to have that kind of provision, an internal specialist base. And I mean, my maths would say roughly a third of all the feeder primary schools would therefore need to have one to make that pattern work as the DfE are doing. So we just need to check the latest guidance from DfE, because it sounds really good. We just need to make sure we don't over-commission our own provision in advance of that if schools are going to have that more directly to their hand.
Thank you very much. Councillor Manning, then Councillor Goldsack.
Thanks, Chair. I've got 2 questions, so I'll do them separately, shall I? Okay. So 2 systems questions. I know there's this procurement of this EYES system, which I assume is this liquid logic thing I was looking up last night. Obviously, this is probably before I was on the committee, but I wonder if you could talk through where the procurement of that came from. Particularly, was there there's a bold claim there about a new system will allow us to do reports? Well, only if there's a data cleaning exercise done, some data hygiene, that sort of thing. Was any of that done before we moved over to it, or is it still in progress? And generally, had there been any discussions, particularly in the IT department? I'm supposed to declare an interest in here because I work in IT, but any discussions about how that system might interact with other recently procured systems we've got at the council?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thank you. Yeah, so we are in the process of implementing the EYES system, the early years and education system. The positive is that it sits with it alongside Liquid Logic, which is where we obviously store our data relating to children with social open to social care, which will enable us to have a more holistic view of children, you know, do that cross-reference. You're right in your points about data inaccuracies. We previously looked to implement a new system, and because that system was not fit for purpose, it forced a dependency on workarounds, so spreadsheets. So we're in the process of migrating that data from the current system, but also from those doing manual uploads. And as we're going through that, we're identifying data inaccuracies, and we have a very thorough training plan so that teams are aware of how to input data so that we get the best functionality for the system when it is implemented on the 6th, 7th of June. So at the moment, there's 11 modules within that system. Sorry, there's 12 modules, 11 modules are all green to go. One is problematic, and that is Send, but we will be able to implement in June, but we will have some post go live activity around that data cleansing. But we are confident that we will be able to implement in June, but we'll have some post go live activity that we've already looked at the resources that need to support that.
Thank you. A positive point, it's not hosted on Amazon, which is a good thing in my view. I think I'll leave that one there. Other than to say, just I think we should probably raise a very minor risk around, because the hosting's in Europe, so we probably need to check we're not going to need to comply with the EU AI Act, depending on how the hosting's actually set up. But that's a kind of relatively minor risk. The other bit, I saw sort of slightly small print, an AI pilot, which rather raised concerns. Is there a separate paper about that somewhere, or a separate, more detailed information? I'm reading that. I'm thinking, I hope we're not just using Copilot to write EHCPs. I hope there's a bit more thought and detail behind it. And there's a provider. Is it EYES? Is it something else? So either can we have some more detail coming back to the committee, because, yeah.
Yeah, that might be something we come back with further detail. We're currently working through the procurement activity that we would need to do to look at this. So it's mentioned here very much one of the various things that we're looking at to help with the overall performance improvement. So it was set out briefly just simply for that. The idea is that there are a number of local authorities already that have been using some very specific AI tools, so not off the shelf in the way you guard against, I think, which are bespoke for EHCP plans. I've seen a particular demo of one that looked quite impressive, but you have to guard against the sales pitch on them. And so the idea is that we want to have a kind of procurement vehicle where a number of those providers that are already doing that with other local authorities can show how those are working, that we can test those before committing to anything else. So I think that's why we'd clearly be able to come back with further detail. So it's just a trial stage at this stage, but just to make it absolutely clear, the demonstration that I saw, which was very impressive on the time scale, that it was able to take all of the professional reports and create the first draft. And that's all it's doing. It's providing the initial draft, and then the EHCP caseworker, the professional, provides the oversight, the quality assurance. It's that jumping off point to then have the conversation with the family and the school and other professionals to say, this is the sum total of the advice. This is what we think the provision could look like. I think things will also get taken over nationally at some point because of the specialist packages that are being suggested in the Send reforms. But for our next particular 2-year plan, we think this could be something that could help us and help the case loading of our staff who have got very high caseloads. We're walking before we can run.
Thanks. I'll just note that on a positive note, I am quite relieved to see talk of AI being used, but FTEs going up. There's a bit of a flag in lots of industries at the moment of people using AI as an excuse to cut jobs, and that's not what it's good for. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goldsack, then Councillor Beckett.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, Michael, thanks very much. I think this report's heading right in the right direction. I'm talking about the actual provision of the report and the focus on it. So thank you very much for that. I've got 3 questions, or 3 points and questions. 3.2.12. This is picking up on the point that Councillor Goodliff made. 1903 backlog. I don't get a sense from the report, and recently I've been in correspondence with Sarah outside the meeting. I don't get the sense of what the action plan is for the backlog. I know we're focusing on the new ones coming in because we can, and we can get them done in 20 weeks and we can move them forward. But I'm very, very conscious of it's not just the individual child or student, it's their family, their siblings, their class, their school. Everybody's impacted by a failure to get the EHCP sorted. So I'm not expecting a verbatim answer today on this, but I would very much like to see what our action plan is to dramatically reduce the backlog of 1,903 the cases that are waiting. Do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, I'll provide an initial comment because thank you. Yes, and I welcome the opportunity to do more detail in future reports. But yeah, I mean, first of all, to acknowledge, of course, it's a critical part of it, and the plan within the team that we've had since we were here in October is very much to address backlog alongside new cases and trying to do that in a measured way. So very much a triage approach around individual children where there could be greater risks that we need to prioritise, and we've had that for some time now within our educational psychology allocations to try to do that, but then at the same time looking at those children that have been waiting a long time. So I think one figure I'll provide just sort of gives a suggestion towards where we are starting, this calendar year, starting to eat it into that. So last year, for those 12 months, we were averaging 150 new referrals coming in. And in the first half of last year, we were only issuing 35 plans on average a month. And then we managed to double that in the second half of last year. So 150 coming in, 35 on time, 35 issued in total. And then the second half of the year, approximately double that, but still half being issued than are coming in fresh. And that's clearly the issue we've got. In the last 3 months, so the start for this spring term, the average coming in has been pretty close, about 160, but we've been issuing on average about 105 per month. So we're starting to change that ratio so that we're slowing down the rate of backlog, and we need to continue that strategy to be able to reduce it fully. But no, I can understand why we need to provide more detail on that in terms of how that would work quarter to quarter as we go through the year to actually turn that around fully. The other thing is that we're looking in more detail at the breakdown between those that are instead of 20 weeks, 25 weeks, 30 weeks, 50 weeks plus, so that we can target our intervention on those. But I can understand that you would need more detail on that future reporting.
Yeah, please. Sorry, through you, Chair, please. I think the issue here is, what I don't want to do is actually we failed on that one, so we might as well leave that now and focus on one that we can succeed on. That's just plainly wrong, and we need to almost doubly focus on those that are beyond. So that would be my second question was a little bit cheeky, really, but 3.2.4. Totally accept that the Q4 performance at 22% raised the average to the 8.8, which is what we achieved. But then the first quarter of 2026 has gone down 4%. What are the reasons for that?
So, yeah, I've got my microphone on. So this is why at the beginning, when I was introducing this section, I was clear to talk about the 20% target for this calendar year. And we will, over the year, there'll be months when we're a bit higher, a bit lower, and it's that cumulative average over the whole year that we'll look at that 20%. The first 3 months of this year, we would always anticipate, and this will be the same in local authorities that are already performing way above national average, anticipate a dip in performance because of that annual phase transfer process that we have to look at for the children going from primary to secondary and post-16, because whilst we do try to organise ourselves in a way where there's particular focus on children with initial assessments, teams looking at annual reviews, teams looking at children moving into special schools. There is a need to have additional help changed around the team. So in the spring term in particular, a lot of the casework capacity and business support capacity would have been switching into those phase transfer reviews to try to get those as many as possible. That was that circa 45% of families that had those in time in May and in March for those two key deadlines. So I would anticipate now that we're getting towards the end of that part of the process, because we're finishing those plans ready for transfer, that we can then start pick up. So later in the year, we'll see performance in higher than 20% to create the 20% over the whole year. So that's why we look at that. The other point in the year, September, we can dip a bit because we do get schools. And this happens everywhere. It's not just in Cambridgeshire. We do get schools in June sort of sending in quite a few high referrals that we then have to pick up, because it's just the nature of how schools are operating. So we're in a period now of stability. In September, we would see that picking up again.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. For the record, I don't like the stretch goal of 20%. That's 80% failure. And I know you're not going to get 100, but that's how I read that. I didn't vote for it. I wasn't in favour of it last October. But I think if we can attain that and then reach the 46% for next year, I'm willing to look that long term. One of the things that can add to that is 3.3.5 is if we, the members, could have a view, because I think it was Councillor Lowe that mentioned earlier that the contact from, I think it might have been Councillor Goodliffe actually, but the contact from our parish councils and our schools. I would really like to see an area by need versus the area by provision. Does that make sense? We've got the board, we've got the raw figures here, but actually I think what would be a really good measurement is so let's say, I haven't got the figures opening because my PC's just decided to close, but let's just say that Fenland have a capacity of 200 and they've got a vacancy rate of 20, right? What's the actual need in Fenland for those 20 vacancies? That's the bit that I'm either not seeing, not being able to read it somehow, or we're not being presented. So I think that would be a really good analysis for you guys to ever think about to present back to us so that we can see. What also comes then is we have these not even going down the LGR route and what may or may not happen. Looking even at now, if you look at the areas of, say, north of St Neots, which is not an area I know very well, but certainly over in Johnny's area, we've got geographic areas where it plainly would make sense to either go even out of county, but certainly out of district, geographically, to go from A to B for some of our people. And I just think that's why I think it would be really useful to understand what I'm asking for is what have we got in the need per area versus what we got for the actual provision.
Yeah, so we can definitely provide that because we do certainly have that information, and one of the a good way of illustrating that is the way that we consult our special schools for places when there is parental preference for special school, and that comes through annual review. And certainly you're right to allude to the fact that for every vacant place in the special school, there will be X number of consultations we're doing. There is that oversubscription. So I think that's what it is that would provide the kind of information you want. We also do have that breakdown from the children who are attending our special schools, for example, from other neighbouring local authorities and vice versa. And we can show you those net positions because that does, in our sufficiency planning, that shows the gaps both geographically but by type of need as well.
It's a very quick one. I know that the next inspection is not until spring 28 or forecast to be spring 28. Are there any plans for either self or peer reviews between now and then that will give us an indication as to what the likely outcome of the 28 inspection will be? I'm only pulling that because I know that's what happens in education world. So I think it might be a good way to follow for us.
I mean, that concept of self-evaluation is just something that you're quite right that we should have and do have within everything we're doing. But to do that in a more formal way, it's actually going to be helped, I think, by the government SEND reforms, because the plans that we have to submit to them in June, in part for money to be flowing to all local authorities for capital and revenue. We've touched on some of that with funding into schools. There'll be a requirement for a quarterly report back to DfE throughout the period, not waiting for the legislative changes, quarterly reporting, probably from the new academic year onwards. So we will have that requirement, and that's the kind of thing that we would be able to provide with yourselves. And I'd imagine that would become a summary of these regular reports here anyway, because they are exactly the kind of things that you would want if DfE want them. You can imagine the kind of things that they'll be wanting progress updates on.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Beckett, then Councillor Stewart.
Sorry, I have 3 questions as well. I'll break them down individually. I'd like to touch on the new structure mix, if that's okay. Could you just describe how the new the new mix of casework and the functions that you've kind of designed are anticipated to improve workflow? And I'm looking at the table in 3.2.19. I'm just clarifying, it's definitely 342 cases per caseworker, or is that a spread across different roles?
Yeah, so I mean, first thing to say is that the table is definitely sort of illustrative of kind of case loading that we could look at. There are many different moving parts here, and we're testing that out with staff at the moment through a live consultation with our staff about how across our services we could look at different ways of working, but particularly when we look at the HCP cohort. This table was trying to show that difference, as I alluded to earlier, about different parts of the team, some of them focusing just on initial assessments, and those focused on the cases that we already have, the annual reviews that are required each year. So the idea is that on average, if you have that caseworker and assistant caseworker working together, and the assistant caseworker will be a new role, we haven't had that in our services before, so that's a new one that we're looking to bring in. That would provide on average 73 cases per year per worker. And that's our focus, trying to have that as low as possible so that we can work on the new assessments and the backlog. So that would be the backlog cases as well, in response to those questions we've had earlier. The higher number of 342 would be across that grouping of 24 staff. And that's for the children who have already got plans at all the different age ranges and looking at their annual reviews. Now, the reason why I was saying these are illustrative is because if the world worked like this, we'd have a very easy surface to operate. But that concept of what we're doing with a live case, it's not just an annual review event. At any point, a parent, a school could contact the team and say, we've got some concerns, we want to talk about some provision, and that concept of these cases being live all the time. So 2 different breakdowns, depending on whether we're looking at initial assessments or annual reviews. I would caveat that in the sense of how we'll end up working that through, but it's trying to show the sense that we want the lower case loads at the moment to be on the teams who can help with the backlog of cases and the new assessments.
Thank you very much. That is really helpful clarity. On the same kind of topic and the same area of the report, I think you've touched on this earlier in what it means by casework being supported by AI, but have we based this design of the structure around the provision of AI tools being available, which currently aren't already in place?
That's an easy one. No. The design is based on how we would work without AI, and if after the AI pilot that provides benefits, that will be in addition to this, so that it would mean that with those caseloads, the throughput would be quicker. That's the hypothesis, but no, AI will be on top of, not as a replacement.
Okay, that's great. Well, I don't need to ask my 3rd question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stewart.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to start off by saying that I think the service restructure with the addition of the assistant caseworkers seems to have meant that there's an increase in staff with the addition of AI support, which I really like. I think it's really innovative. And I can see that the 780,000 investment has delivered the 125 cases within the backlog to have been progressed. And it seems that the monthly output has increased in comparison to early last year, which is really positive. I do have several questions. I could talk about this all day. So initially, how much of the recent improvement is dependent on the extra £780,000?
Okay, sorry, we're debating over who took the question, but the 780, as you've referred to, is because we're going through the education redesign. It was obviously to address in the interim how we manage the current pressures on the service, and that has allowed us to do what you've just picked up on, that reduction in terms of the backlog for 125 backlogged cases. What we're aiming to do moving forward through the education redesign and what Michael's just referred to in the table is have a longer term sustainable plan where we'll be able to do more improvement by building capacity in those areas where we know that the staff are under pressure, particularly caseworkers in our educational psychology service.
Thank you. In terms of innovation, I feel that the white paper allows for us to really make the world what it is that we want within Cambridgeshire, because you mentioned if the world worked like this, and I think the world can work how we want it to work if we are willing to make the changes that we want to make, in turn, not just following on what has already been put in place. And I think there's lots of things I feel that could be put in place in terms within schools themselves. Every school has an SEN coordinator. Every school could possibly have a caseworker that deals with the review plan of EHCPs or the initial work on EHCPs or completion of them, which could then just be reviewed by an officer or a member of the team within county. In turn, having it more internal within schools so they could work on their own caseloads, reducing the backlog in that sense. Is that something that has been explored?
Kind of. That's my one quick response. So the reason I nuance that is that the reforms, the part of the reforms I think that's really exciting, and it alludes to that point you've made, is the experts at hand approach that government have set out, and very recently they've also set out what that funding looks like, certainly for year one. There's some caveats, and they're going to clarify that in May for all local authorities, but it is again part of that money that's flowing ahead of any legislative changes, which is really good. Now, what that is doing is saying that there should be experts at hand around schools, and it aligns very closely with the team around the school and the team around the family model that we're developing through our education redesign. And if we go back even further to November 2024, when Inclusion for All was officially adopted here in Cambridgeshire, that was at the heart of that new way of working, which was very much moving away from that reliance on specialist and education, health and care plans to provide all of that provision, and actually looking to see how we could support schools that SEN support more. And the SEND reforms do that in a very explicit way through targeted plus specialist packages and this experts at hand approach. And the DfE guidance is setting out the kind of professionals that they would see creating that, in our phrase, team around the school, in theirs, experts at hand. And whilst it might not be quite so defined in that a location of co-located staff in individual schools, it certainly is the idea of that collaboration with schools through clusters and through 4 locality partnerships to try to coordinate our work. So a bit like the question earlier about need versus provision, parts of the county, certain schools will require more experts at hand, more team around the school resource, and that's what we want to deploy. But your specific example about caseworkers within schools and that cross-pollination of expertise and helping with plans, that's very much in line, I think, with the reforms. That idea that there's a single plan for a child as you go through, and not such a demarcation between before and after an EHCP, with or without an EHCP. It's much more about that continual provision which we're looking to design. So it's those kind of concepts that are in the reforms.
Thank you very much. Last, okay, I'm just conscious this is
Apologies.
one of the report.
I just say I really like that idea. I think that will help with transition from early years to primary into secondary, and I think that will support all of the hardworking members of staff within schools and help support the young people that really need that support. And many of us do work with young people within the provisions offered within Cambridgeshire, and I think that approach would go a long way.
Thank you very much. Councillor Damery-Homan.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your report and presentation. I appreciate there's been some good planning, good responses to the white paper, and there are a lot of positive proposals coming in this space. But my anxiety really remains so strong over the provision of educational psychologists. I'm looking at the Education Policy Institute have recently done a study. I've just on educational psychologists in England, and one of the quotes from one of the directors who wrote it is that we cannot deliver the government's goal of inclusive mainstream education while the educational psychologist workforce remains critically under-resourced. Now, we see about 200 educational psychologists qualified each year, if my understanding is correct. I'm not even sure if that would be replacing the amount of educational psychologists leaving the field every year. And I think my question to you is, how are we as a local authority managing the risk around what is an incredibly unstable, underfunded, but direly needed area of SEND support? Thank you.
I'm going to start. This might be a two-part answer. I'll do the brief bit, which is just to acknowledge that and say that in the Experts at Hand funding that's been announced from government, educational psychology is one of the specific groups that they mention that they expect local areas to look at the investment in. But as you said, that's easier said than done because of the time for training, etc., etc. We do have an approach here in Cambridgeshire, as many local authorities have done in recent years, which is really trying to grow your own, and we have that combination of trainee EPs, assistant EPs to do that. And the approach always with that is to make sure that once you have provided that investment, that you are the location where they want to carry out their main practice. And with educational psychologists around the country, that's meaning that their average day, their average week is a mix of working on EHCP assessment reports, but having time to do that whole school advice and guidance, etc. And that's what we need to keep doing here. When you've got a backlog of plans, it's very tempting to think we just need to put all of our precious resource into doing that. But that lack of a mixed diet isn't going to be helping there. So we're using locums for that and trying to have that rich picture for our EPs, and the trainees are part of that. We've currently got 3 out of the total cohort. So yeah, it's a difficult area, but we're looking to keep that approach going and to see from government what else support there might be in line with that ambition.
I think Michael has covered it. I think the only thing, and it's a neat segue into the next bit, is I suppose if we move on to the white paper and what's within it, I think we'll probably pick up some of what Michael's alluded to in terms of the shift in approach, which will also pick up on the challenge around EPs.
Thank you. I mean, I'm really pleased to hear that we're looking at how we can train people in-house as well. I think that's something as a committee and as a council we should be doing as much as we can of, given the challenges in the national picture. Yeah, I'll leave my comments there. Thank you, Chair.
would you like to, I'm conscious that there are several sections you would like to get through.
Yeah.
Obviously, questions may come up that don't relate directly to what you're saying, maybe to something that's passed. But if you'd like to move to the
Just to summarise.
section.
Yes, thank you. So, I mean, we've started to move into some of these areas already, haven't we? So, May, if I just summarise what we've got in there. So, moving on from that performance, so the inclusive places section is a position statement setting out confirmation that we do now have the extra funding confirmed by DfE for the 2 new special schools for the county. And actually, just a clarification, one of those would be an area special school, so taking a broad range of complex needs. One of those would be specifically for social, emotional, and mental health. So again, that talks to that point earlier about type of need around the county and making sure that we've got sufficient provision. We are awaiting confirmation from the DfE on the timescale around that in terms of their delivery of that. So, we do need to heavily caveat that, but at least the commitment has been made. The enhanced resource bases, we've already touched on that, some comments about those. So we have various different provisions across the county, and the exercise we're involved in at the moment is making sure that we're very clear about the different types of specialist provision we've got on the continuum of provision. So we've had some new enhanced resource bases set up last year in primary. There are 4 new ones opening this year, one as we speak, and 3 more from the start of the new academic year. And in the paper, it just shows a map and a table showing the distribution across the county. And then I think I've already touched on this briefly, but government are setting out more capital funding in line with the reforms. So we just need to take stock of that to make sure that we know what's going to be going into individual schools for their own children, distinct from when we commission a resource base. It's for the area and for children that might need to move to that school in the same way they might move to a special school, but it's keeping them within mainstream. I think they're the main points we just wanted to make on that section of the report.
Thank you. Councillor Damry-Howman.
Thank you. This is just this is quite a quick question. 3.3.12 refers to children and young people having an aspiration to achieve up to 80% attendance in mainstream lessons. I would like to know a bit more about the quality control around assessing this. One thing that I've experienced working in schools is where you have SEND children, they will turn up to a lesson to mark their attendance, and within 5 minutes they're gone and haven't taken part in the lesson and fulfilled the intention of this, but the numbers still register as high attendance. Is that something that we monitor and can factor into any assessments?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things that we've been fortunate enough to access is nationally, everybody is looking at models around enhanced resource provision, but what we can't rely on is just that physical space will transform outcomes for children. So we've been working closely with one of our special heads to develop that curriculum offer, and I think that is intrinsic to what you're asking around a curriculum offer within the ERBs, but also the monitoring. So we're working closely with this special head to have a consistent approach in terms of the curriculum offer, but also the impact measures against that curriculum offer. Because what we want to do as much as as possible is to enable some of those children to access that specialist support, but also look at reintegration where appropriate into mainstream. So that is all part of that developing curriculum offer that we are looking to have some consistency across, so that because it's a big ask of some of our schools, and we want to ensure that they're fully supported in terms of the implementation and also the outcomes for those children that attend them.
Councillor Edge.
Thank you for the substantial paper and the amount of detail in it. I just want to kind of come back to the special schools. I mean, obviously, we absolutely welcome the decision on that. It's fantastic news. I just want to kind of relate it to where things may potentially be going in the future with the white paper. So it's great that we've got these schools. In the paper, it actually describes that it's brilliant because they're kind of then in their local communities. I'd kind of challenge that and say, actually, are they? because we've got children that are traveling 20-30 miles to a special school, which is fantastic that they're there, but that doesn't place them in their communities. So I guess my question is really around whether you foresee that actually the drive of the white paper is going to bring more and more specialist provision into the local schools, and therefore what you feel the future of the special schools may be in the future.
Yeah, so I suppose there's two main parts to this from my perspective. One of which is the links between the total cohort of children who are in specialist provision compared to those that are in our local state-funded special schools. So we've got a large number of children who are attending independent sector provision, and often, majority of cases, we're doing that because of a lack of capacity. And I think it's a well-known aspect, and it's alluded to in the government reforms also about the high costs of those provisions, and there's aspects in the white paper looking to address that within that particular sector. So when we think about our sufficiency plan and sufficiency of provision, if we could imagine overnight being able to land those new special schools and they open their doors and can take pretty close up to 100% of the children safely very quickly. I mean, in reality, we grow them steadily, don't we? And the same with the resource-based provisions. And by doing that, reduce our reliance on children travelling to outside independent provision or independent school provision that might be relatively close, but is a lot more expensive and providing the same, at best, same quality. So it's that sufficiency of provision, having more special school provision in the county alongside our enhanced resource bases will mean we've got sufficient provision, because when we can then stop that reliance on high cost provision and invest that money far better in earlier support. The second part to me is thinking about capacity. That point earlier about oversubscription of our specialist provision. We want to try to get to a situation where the majority of children are in their local mainstream school. For those children that need to have time in enhanced resource-based provision, that occurs, and for children with the most complex needs into special. But also set out in the white paper is that focus on outreach coming from special schools and alternative provision. And I think that's going to be something that we can develop in an exciting way here. I understand now that I've been here best part of a year talking to all the special schools that used to be a feature of the provision here and something that we want to be able to return to. And there is some specific government funding that seems to be aligned to that. What that can do is make sure that children really can be included in their local community as much as possible, because there is that specialist support around the schools. So the experts at hands I mentioned earlier, that can then include outreach from special and AP for the majority of children to have meaningful inclusion in their mainstream school. And I think that's the point, it's meaningful inclusion, because for those children who are in our complex needs schools where that is those are their friends, those are the children and the families that they have connections with them through the school, that is their local area, and that's meaningful inclusion. We always need to keep an eye on that. So I think it's that mixture, and I need to make sure I don't get carried away with excitement about the reforms too much, because we need the detail, but it does look to be heading in the right direction and validates what we're trying to do through Inclusion for All and gives us the tools to be able to go further and faster, I think.
Thank you very much for that. I don't see any other hands, so perhaps on to the next section.
We've mentioned this as we go through. I think you could probably tell from the responses that we've made already with some of these aspects that we're cautiously optimistic about the SEND reforms. We've set out in the paper a high level summary about these, and I think some key messages I mean, I'm the AD for inclusion, but Sarah quite rightly always reminds everyone that this is the education white paper, which includes the SEND reforms, and a lot of the national reporting has kind of almost needs reminding about that as well. But we do keep going back to inclusion for all. That's why there is the alignment, because inclusion for all is not about special educational needs in isolation and not about the children with most complex needs. It's about all of the children, and that's what the white paper is looking at. Specifically with the SEND reforms, I think some areas that we're particularly pleased to see. The experts at hand we've mentioned quite a few times, but earlier I mentioned just once that phrasing of targeted and targeted plus within mainstream. That is going back really to something pre the 2014 reforms, which I think is going to be a really positive aspect. Pre 2014, we had School Action and Action Plus. There was very clearly defined support that schools were putting in around individual education plans. And in the reforms, they're talking about the individual specialist plans for children, and clearly looking to legislate to make sure that what we currently call SEN support, in future targeted and targeted plus, has that same legal status and therefore confidence for families as we do with the HCPs. And that's a big part of, I think, what we're seeing in the reforms, the fact that it is trying to unpick some of the unintended consequences that came from 2014 with that move towards the HCP and a feeling of anxiety if that wasn't there. Whereas what the reforms look to be is being truly holistic around how we could look at the universal offer of which education is, and then for the children that need the additional support, how that builds. And again, the fact that money is starting to be set out and how that's going to flow into the county as across all local areas to provide that wraparound support looks good. So there's a response that anyone can make to the government consultation by the 18th of May. And then, as we've already mentioned, in June, a formal plan that we will submit to the DfE, which will then be monitored. But yeah, I think there is a growing feeling nationally that these are well considered reforms, and they align very much to what we're trying to do here in Cambridgeshire.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Tong.
Hello. Now, firstly, can I thank you for this report because, well, this part of a report, as you pointed out, it's very eclectic. I think it covers the high level, I think the term was used, and I agree very, very well. And I definitely agree that national government have set some very ambitious targets when it comes to SEN reform. 3.4.2 says higher GCSE outcomes, halving the disadvantage gap, increased school attendance and improved early years development, which would be great. And I think ambition is really good. However, that needs to be coupled with delivery. And the one thing I wanted to ask is about that delivery, because anybody can set ambitious targets. It's about whether or not we're being provided with the resources and tools to actually deliver on those targets. Now, you've pointed out in 3.4.4 that there has been £2 million quite ambiguously allocated towards helping local authorities reorganise and restructure to start to deliver these objectives. What I want to know is a bit more about this number from a council perspective, because, well, in my opinion, it's quite easy to pick a big number that will look nice on a press release. I want to know a bit more from your perspective about how much you actually think this is going to cost. Obviously, we don't know how this money is going to be, given to people, but from our perspective, how much do we need to deliver these changes? Because as far as I can see, I can imagine them being very costly. These large, organizational shifts, those are expensive things to do.
Yeah, I'll start on that one. It's a biggie. So there are funding streams coming online, 3 of them critically. One, and I think Michael's alluded to all of them, the Mainstream Inclusion Fund, which is 1.6 billion over 3 years, and that is to support schools, to enable them to be more, to support children without that reliance on an education, health and care plan. So we've talked a lot about the backlogs earlier. and the pressure that that is putting on schools. So this inclusion fund will go directly to schools to enable them to support children. We don't know our allocation yet, so we will have to work through that. The second funding stream, which Michael's alluded to, is the Expert at Hands funding, and that's 1.8 billion. Again, we're working through what that looks like from a Cambridgeshire perspective. What's really positive about it is that it will support the team around the school approach that we've adopted, which means we will bring in closer support to schools in their communities for speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, our caseworkers, our educational psychologists. But I think the critical thing in your question is this can't be delivered in isolation. It's a partnership endeavour. You know, the local area inspection was an inspection of the local area, and that Expert in Hands funding, the expectation is it's about a 40% split between local authority and health in terms of what that can then fund, and then there's also some implementation funding to support that. So we're working through practically what those funding streams look like, but what's genuinely positive is that they do support and add to the approach that we were already taking, which does address a lot of the challenges around the room today around the backlog, because it shouldn't be all about if you get a plan, you get support. It should be about identifying needs earlier and then putting that support in place from the right service. So it does feel like it is the right direction of travel, but you're right to challenge the implementation, and that will be dependent on our partnership response. So on Monday, we have a meeting with all of our key partners to look at our initial thinking around the SEND reform plan. And you asked about the tools. There is a locality maturity assessment tool that has 7 areas of focus within it that we've already distributed to our partners, and that will help us. It's kind of like a self-evaluation framework, and that will help us frame the objectives and priorities in our SEND reform plan, obviously picking up on the 5 areas for development that already came through in our inspection. And that's what we would like also. You know, at the start of the meeting, we talked about we want to have member engagement. So a lot in this report, and actually perhaps to commit to a session outside of this meeting to then look at that draft SEND reform plan before we submit it in June.
Thank you. Councillor Edge.
Thank you. So I've shared this with you before. I think one of my biggest concerns when I'm looking at the white paper and the funding is the impact potentially on schools. I think it feels like it's a bit of a shift from kind of the impact being on the local authorities and passing that over to schools. I think if you kind of look at it quite a crude calculation, it would kind of make an average of about 55,000 per school to be able to deliver the provision that they may need, which when you then start to think of just the staff that might be needed within that school, that's not going to go very, very far. It's a bit of a difficult one, really, because I mean it's really down to what the white paper kind of results on with the consultation. And I think I'd encourage anybody else who does respond to kind of really flag that concern, because it really is one that I think we should all be taking on. I mean, how do you feel our schools will cope with this from speaking to the school forum? And are they up for the challenge, or are they similarly concerned about the impact on their own budgets?
Go for it.
So I think there is an acknowledged issue around the level of funding going into schools in the county directly and enabling them to meet need. I talked earlier, didn't I, about the reality check about schools waiting for plans and the fact that they do have delegated resource, but they have X percentage of a delegated resource and lots of things to do with it. And we do know, don't we, that there are, despite the phrase that's been over a decade now around the country of fair funding and the national funding formula, it doesn't seem to be equal, equitable, fair, however you want to look at it, when you compare schools within a county like Cambridgeshire compared to other parts of the country. So, you know, we certainly know that our colleagues in schools, head teachers in Maintained and the Multi-Academy Trust as well, we're all very closely aligned on the fact that there is very clear data that shows that that isn't equitable, and therefore, whether it's part of the response on the reforms or separate, that lobbying, that highlighting to DfE that that needs to be resolved. And the reason for that really is just going back to that experts at hand funding again. That is providing funding into the local area for us to secure professionals to wrap support around schools. That will be effective, but it will be a lot more effective, of course, if schools feel that they've got the ability to have their own good staffing where they can then take forward the advice and guidance that is provided. So I think we're just acknowledging that really, that it is a tension and certainly something that comes through with Schools Forum and the continued provision that we're working on with them.
I would just add that we do also, in that recognition, there's a number of schools that are in deficit, an increasing number of schools that are in deficit. But I think the disappointing thing in terms of what's been labelled as the national crisis in SEND is that it does pitch people against each other, parents and carers against schools, schools against the local authority. And I think in response to the earlier question, this has to be a partnership response. And at the centre of this is children and young people, you know, and we all have a shared responsibility to improve outcomes for those children with additional needs. So I think despite the challenges, we have to have that one shared vision that we want to use the resources that we have across the system to improve the experience of children and young people. And actually our energies are better invested in doing that than saying, you know, you've got the funding, you haven't got the funding. We're all in a similarly difficult scenario because the demand has increased so significantly.
Thank you very much. Are there any other points you'd like to make about your report or any concluding remarks, or that's... Thank you. Are there any other points of debate, perhaps? Councillor Goldsack.
Just one, and I think it's becoming clear, and it's maybe something that we could agenda and discuss in the future, but it's plain to see that the 780k investment has proved a worthwhile thing and a good thing to do. What really worries me is when that money runs out and what we're going to do. So I think the discussion here, and particularly on it's a political discussion, but politically on the members of the administration, is what are we going to do to secure funding to supplement the 780k and make sure that we're giving these officers and everybody involved the absolute maximum chance of success. And I'll go back to a point I made earlier. You know, the stretch goal, according to what's written down this year, is 20%, which means 80% of people will not get seen in time. Right. So, you know, we've got to be realistic about this. So 780k has got us to an 80% failure rate. It's green shoots of recovery, but come on, we've got to be absolutely together as a committee here and put a good case forward to empower the administration to find the funds to be able to support what we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
I think the 780k has allowed for the restructuring and then the new innovation with AI possibility and then the new roles to be implemented. So I think when I've looked and reviewed other councils and how they have been getting on, I think the reason why I'm correct me if I'm wrong, the 20% is something that will increase once the structures that are being put in place are embedded. I'm assuming that the 20% will increase, and then we won't have the 80% failure rate as mentioned. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think Michael outlined that it's a 20% and then will increase to 46%. But I think there is a challenge. There's a challenge, and obviously we're responding to that challenge. Yes, but yes, we are expecting that the 22% will then move to 46%, which is much closer to the national But obviously, you know, there is a significant demand, and the new funding announced within the white paper will also support and accelerate our improvement.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Lowe, Councillor Edge.
Thank you. Do we have an estimated time frame for when we will be up to the 46%? Please.
Yeah, so the target is to achieve that by the end of the 2027 calendar year. So 20% as a minimum by this Christmas, and then the following Christmas 2027 would be the 46%. That's the current trajectory.
Debate or questions is fine. Councillor Edge.
So yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from with the 20%. I've challenged it quite a few times as well. I think the time that I've spent with the officers, I feel that it's really important. I think their ambition, I think that in the past kind of year particularly, we've seen a lot of change, and I think the ambition to kind of improve things is absolutely there. There's no golden wand is my kind of feeling. I think we need to keep pushing for that ambition, to keep pushing it forward. Hopefully we exceed, you know, we can encourage things to kind of go beyond the 20% this year, and maybe beyond 46% next year. But I think when you're not going to move from 8%, which is where we were at, to 70% or 80% overnight. I think the bit that I really want to be seeing from this, which again I've spoken to officers about, is more understanding of what's happening with all of those children who were waiting in the meantime. You know, I think we know that there's 80% or as of last year, kind of 92% who are still sitting there waiting. What's happening with them? Have we got enough assurance to know that they're still getting a good level of support in school, alternative provision at home, whatever? And that's the bit I think we need to kind of focus on with that, because we're not going to suddenly overnight get rid of that 80%, in my view.
Thank you. Yes, and it's important what that 80% looks like. Councillor Goldsack.
If I may come back, I totally agree. The point I'm trying to make is that, and the councillor opposite made some decent points, that a lot of that was in restructuring, et cetera, but they weren't one-off costs. A lot of this has gone into what is now business as usual, additional staff, additional resource, et cetera, and we've not plainly got the budget that's needed to attain 100%. Let's be blunt, 100%. 46%. You know, maybe the national average. Why aren't we the best of the national? Why aren't we aiming to be the best of the national? And I hate to say it, but it comes down to a political choice. We have to look at this and say, right, the budget to attain 70% in the HCP support is X. Where can we get that budget from? And that is a political choice that we make. And that was the point I was trying, not disagreeing with anything else you said, Johnny, about the 20%, because I think we're both in sync with that. But that's the point I'm trying to make here, that we've got to think, how are we going to support our officers to give the service that's needed to these 1,903 kids that haven't been seen in over a year? Sorry, not a year, in over 20 weeks. You know, we're failing them. And also, coupled with the fact that whilst we get this and we can see some shoots to recovery, it's not till 2008 that we've got another CQC inspection to come in and tell us exactly what they're thinking.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
When the decision to request more funding was made, was there a discussion on should we request more than what was requested? So essentially, what seems to be coming across here is, from my perspective, is the money that essentially has been invested for the restructuring. Are we going to need to invest more money? And if that's the case, my question would be, why wasn't it requested initially already with the extra 750 odd thousand?
I think we're focusing on the 780, which was a contribution back in October, but prior to that, there had also been investment to support additional SEND caseworkers. So I don't think it's been the only contribution above budget. And I think the other, I guess, the other thing to which I think Michael alluded to is that in light of the SEND reforms, there are funding streams coming on track, which we were already preempting, and so our development of the enhanced resource bases, for instance, is something that we were already on with, and now there is an expectation that every secondary school will have some kind of inclusion unit. So I think we need to be looking at the current investment and the changes we're proposing in the education redesign, because it is an education redesign. It's about looking at children, in advance of the needs escalating, but also understanding better the funding and the breakdown of that funding and the allocation of that funding and what it will support. So I think we're probably in a position where we do need to, and we are looking at this alongside our statutory 151 officer, to understand the breadth and scope of what we are able to do with that funding allocation. And we're not quite in the position where we know exactly what that looks like. So I think we're probably, we've got to look at our current investment, look at the impact of the education redesign, and then also consider the scope of the new funding streams and what that can contribute to, before we probably then start looking at requests for additional funding.
Thank you. I feel members have had a really good go at scrutinising and debating this paper. Are there any final comments that anyone wants to make, or can we look at the recommendations? Nope. Thank you very much indeed for that that very full report, and thank you everyone for the scrutiny and the engagement. It's a really important area for us, very fast moving, and a great deal of challenge, quite appropriately, so that we can support children and young people in Cambridgeshire. Is everyone happy to look at the recommendations as a whole, or does any group want to separate the recommendations out? Everyone happy to deal with them together? So if everyone is happy to support the recommendations, will you raise your hand? Thank you very much. And thank you, Sarah and Michael, again for the report and for answering all our questions today. It is just about 2 hours, and I think our note takers need a 10-minute break. So if that's all right, can we please come back at 4:06, which is in 10 minutes' time. Thank you. Well, welcome back. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 6, please, of the agenda. This is the participation reports. Excellent reports, very interesting. It's going to be introduced by Liz Clark, who's the Service Director for Quality Assurance and Practice Improvement. And then there'll be any questions or scrutiny from members. Liz, over to you.
Thanks ever so much. So as has been indicated, you've got 2 quarters worth of reports kind of today. June, you'll see the final quarter will come to the next committee. Can I just comment that in terms of the recommendation on the cover report, it talks about yourselves noting the content of the report. Obviously, that should indicate to scrutinise rather than note. So more than happy, obviously, for any kind of questions or oversight at this time. So the reports obviously illustrate what we do about participation and engagement with our children and young people. And I think it's very clear that what it indicates is that range of both the kind of strategic approach, the governance around that within the directorate, the operational pieces and the actual direct kind of sort of work and projects. There are obviously some things within those 2 quarter reports that I think we are very proud of, which is obviously the events, particularly in relation to our children in care and our care leavers and how successful those were, in terms of particularly those pieces where it talks about our young people being recognised nationally and locally in terms of awards. And I think that's a really important thing to illustrate. Obviously, those are detailed within the attached documents. It also talks obviously about the overall sort of direction about sort of participation, and I think we have really sort of striven to improve that significantly in the past kind of sort of 12 to 18 months. And these reports really sort of show the kind of variety and the breadth kind of now. So in terms of obviously the continued development of the council's local offer to kind of care leavers is one kind of thing, and obviously we've sort of talked about the continuing strengthening of the groups and the governance around participation and engagement. I would like to highlight that actually a lot, the operational work happens across the service, but the actual participation team within the directorate is 1 team manager and 2 workers, 2 officers. So there is they do very well with the amount of resource that we have, but we do have participation engagement leads and champions across all areas of the service, and that strategic group is where we kind of bring and collate those pieces of work together. So I'm happy to obviously open up to any questions about the specifics in the reports. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or either items of clarification or any debate points from members? I think you may have stunned everyone into silence with this report. No, they're really excellent reports. I appreciate very much that they've been brought to committee and that we've had chance to read and digest them, because they do give a very vivid picture of the kind of things that we're doing.
Thank you. And I should have said I've had obviously the privilege of presenting them, but the completion of them was by the managers within the service. So obviously all the pictures and all the editorial is their work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And moving on now to item 7 on the agenda, the Corporate Parenting Performance Report. So Liz, it's you again, and also Melissa Jiggins, Head of Corporate Parenting. Perhaps you'll just outline the paper for members. Thank you.
So obviously in terms of the last committee, you have seen this is the updated version of the corporate parenting performance report for today. So it covers, in terms of the report that you've got attached with the overview report, the same areas that we've kind of looked at in terms of the data at the previous committee. This obviously has data in relation to as of January 2026. And again, the next committee will see that kind of updated.
So looking at the cover report, I think it would be fair to say that we would suggest we have some strong performance in a variety of areas, and obviously I would draw your attention particularly to the number of children with care and reviews completed in time, the number of visits completed, and actually there is an observation around that we have had the highest rate of visits recording since formal monitoring began 6 years ago. And I think, that is very much testament to the work, particularly of Melissa as the head of service and the other service managers within corporate parenting who have been driving that work, and the head of service who sits across family support and safeguarding, where obviously some of our children in care on their interim orders sit as well in terms of ownership. We have a similar kind of positive picture about the number of the percentage of children who've been subject to 3 or more moves. I think when we came last time, we said that actually we were meeting kind of the target around that. Obviously, the kind of scrutiny of children who do have those moves, the report talks about actually how that's overseen and looked at within various panels and decisions around from senior managers. There is on 3.8, there is a particular paragraph around the feedback that we've gathered from children, young people and care leavers in the most recent period. And again, some really strong and positive messages from our children and young people and care leavers, which we are very happy to hear, but also to hear about those things they still would like more development or more focus on. Personal education plans, obviously in terms of that's an extremely strong performance in terms of 97.8%. And I know you have previously had the annual report from the virtual school, and you are very aware as a committee of our very strong offer from our virtual school in this local authority. There's detail around kind of what we're doing around those children where we have missing from care episodes. And again, to provide that assurance of the kind of work across the service and the scrutiny and the kind of safeguarding of those children where those things do occur. I would say that our initial health assessment, which does not necessarily look like the highest figure, that is better than the benchmark in the Eastern region. We are performing higher. It is a really difficult kind of target. There is some text around that in terms of, I think you've heard me say the same thing before, all children get an initial health assessment. This is about whether that initial health assessment is completed within 20 working days of coming into care. But I would want to draw the attention that we are increasing that, and when comparing ourselves to our Eastern region colleagues, we are still looking stronger on that, even whilst we are not complacent and we wish to continue to improve that. And our pathway plan completion remains strong as well. And obviously in terms of the adoption kind of data, I think I have some more detail around the fact that we do have, whilst the number of children who have been leaving care have adopted, our percentage is lower than the national target. So it's important to say that that 18% is a national target and not a local one. But actually what we have seen in Cambridgeshire in the last 3 months is more children leaving care than coming into care, month by month, November, December, January. And actually we have increased the number of children who are leaving care to SGO, to special guardianship arrangements, or actually returning home to kind of family. So whilst the adoption number, it looks lower than the national target, we are kind of also quite satisfied in terms of the number of children placed for adoption. So those children still remain as a care figure, but they're actually in kind of in placements where they will be kind of seeking those adoption orders. So that was just to make that point about why that data may have posed a question to some of you, but just to provide some assurance and detail on that.
Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Any points of clarification or any debate points? Councillor Beckett.
I'm looking at 3.9, which is, yeah, great. It's really, really good to see that the quality of the relationship is really valued, and that's obviously something that improves the quality of life and well-being of everyone in care at the moment. But do we get an understanding from the interviews that were conducted about what it is about those relationships that actually gets to the heart of why that's such a quality relationship? You know, so is it the fact that they're there regularly, or is it what is it about that? And then how are we using that to improve it where others aren't maybe as good?
What we know about our foster placements is that they provide stability, they provide security for the children and a safe place to talk. And I think that our children have benefited from the one-to-one. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? From our experience of our foster carers in-house and independent fostering agencies, they provide children with stability and security and the chance to have one-to-one time and that support. So our foster carers are interested in our children. They have a genuine interest in their activities, the things that they want to do. And social workers are finding that when they're going out to see children, they have that one-to-one time to explore and to reflect on their homes. And that's what they're telling us, as well as part of our internal assessment and explorations of this. And what our families tell us as well is that they want us to be interested, so children are not in isolation, they have parents still. And what we're exploring is the opportunity to speak to parents in our next team meeting in the next few months, because we've had some really positive and successful reunifications, and parents want to share that. And I think that's a really good step. And also our young person wants to talk to social workers about how she feels that it went well and what she feels that could be changed as well.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you very much. And yeah, this is an area of the council that I always think is run really well, and I think we're doing a really grand job of it. I mean, 733 would be lovely if that was significantly lower, but it is where it is. Just a question really, and it's a lack of my understanding. There used to be a scheme, and there may be still a scheme, and that's part of the question, whereby volunteers could buddy with children in care and help. I know, for instance, you won't mind me using his name, Councillor Bywater has been actively involved in the past in mentoring and helping certain things. Is that still current? And if so, can we get some more details about it?
So we do have a statutory responsibility as a local authority to offer independent visitor kind of sessions to our children in care. So that might be, these are volunteers. So we do have a group of volunteers who sit under the support and supervision of the participation service. And they are our independent visitors for our children in care. So children are referred by their IROs or their social worker if they need that kind of contact, if that's felt it'd be something that would be helpful, and then they're matched. And we also kind of recruit further volunteers kind of for that. So that's something we are asked to kind of require, and it is much more around, as you described, that kind of sort of buddy kind of system. So actually those independent visitors have contact with children, they take them out, they do kind of sort of activities with them. There's an amount of money those volunteers can claim per month or per visit in terms of what they can do with that young person, and we have a whole annual report and set of information around the feedback from those children, what's been done, what happens, how we've matched that and how that's overseen.
You, Chair Liz. Majority of people in this room, members in this room, are fairly new, as in under a year to CYP. It might be worth sharing that out to members of this committee. I can see a few nods going around that might be more interested. I mean, it could be that you're full, which would be great. But if there was some vacancies in there, that may be a beneficial route.
More than happy to send out. We did a relaunch recently, so we have a very handy set of slides that I can also send out, which then provides the detail of that information around that. So happy to do that.
I raise it for two reasons. The primary reason is to get the exposure out there. The secondary reason is I know my colleague, Councillor Bywater, has personally gained so much by being actively involved in it.
And I think Councillor Bywater obviously had had an additional kind of mentoring sort of kind of piece. So I'm starting with what we've already got in kind of structure in terms of independent visitors, but I know we have had a number of conversations about how we can further consider kind of mentoring opportunities, particularly for kind of members. But I'm happy to send the independent visitor stuff out because obviously that's an organised and constructed thing that we've already deliver on.
Thank you. Very happy to have that come out post this meeting. Councillor Demery-Herman.
Thank you, Chair. A quick one from me. So I'm looking at page 145 and the type of home of children in care. At the moment, it's showing 9 children in unregistered facilities. Am I right in thinking that that number has decreased?
You are right in thinking that number has decreased. As of yesterday, it was 6. As of probably end of this week, it'll be 5. And we've had a number of meetings in the last week or so between myself and the other 2 service directors with commissioning, and we have gone through in minute detail just to refresh ourselves exactly where we're at with those children. I mean, obviously we track that at weekly panel. We have very clear kind of safety planning and scrutiny around that, and we work across the clinical service, the independent reviewing officers and the social work teams. So the ones we do currently have in unregistered, we have some plans around some of those, but we have the scrutiny and oversight.
Brilliant, thank you for that. I think for all of us, that's great to hear. I know it's been something, and registered places has been a bit of a concern in the committee. So excellent to hear progress. Thank you.
Very much. Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Liz. Just two questions. I'll take them separately. The first one is around the children that go missing in care. There is obviously quite a huge spike in June. So the first 2 parts of this question. The first one, is that something that we regularly see around that time? Obviously, you're getting to the school holidays, etc. Is that regular? But also, there's a significant increase in the ratio. So on average, it's sort of 1 to 1, 1 to 2. So 1 child for 2 episodes. That's now then it goes up to a 1 to 3. What I think would also be useful to understand is that 1 child that goes missing, let's say 60 times, or is that on average children going missing 3 times? It'd be useful to know what the outliers are to that data, because if we've got 1 child going missing over 10 times, then there's a question that I want to ask about what the safeguarding's in place for children in those circumstances. But if you're saying it is all of those 33 children have on average gone missing 3 times, that's a different conversation.
Okay, I'll take that in order. So in terms of the spike as to whether that's a kind of seasonal one, I don't have like the immediacy of some of the data kind of sort of here. So I would need to, if you're interested in sort of tracking back, we've done a lot of work about developing the kind of dashboard, the performance dashboard about missing and exploitation. So we've got historical data, if that would be helpful. I think we always interrogate why we look at sort of why there might be kind of seasonal kind of spikes. And I think that, there is, probably a kind of an obvious thing around summer months and lighter evenings. However, it is still really important that we analyse kind of what's happening to individual children and cohorts of children. So some of that maybe, is also associated with who it is rather than just that kind of seasonal piece. So if we said in terms of the how many episodes per child, that can vary kind of sort of month to month. There are a number of children who do have more than a couple of episodes, absolutely. I think what the report is seeking to try and give assurance on is every child who has, every child who goes missing has a kind of safety response. Those who have more of a risk around that propensity to go missing and will have trigger plans, safety plans, risk assessments, network meetings on a weekly basis with providers and social workers, involvement from our missing and exploitation team and our SAFE team within the local authority. And if they are placed out of area, then obviously working closely with, relevant colleagues from services in different local authorities in terms of engaging kind of things depending on where they're going. What's kind of really helpful to think about is obviously we do record all children where they are absent from where they should be and they're not known where they are as missing. Sometimes those episodes are very short in length, so perhaps they've got a curfew and they come back a little bit later than they should do, but they will have been recorded as missing by that point because that's what we ask providers and carers to do. So it's also about analysing, the particular kind of the level of concern about where we think children have been, what information we have from their return home interviews. A number of children who go missing are out with friends or, kind of just out not wanting to kind of come back, but they're not necessarily those we then deem that we have a significant concern about exploitation. So it's very much purported on the individual child. And I think, we are very focused, in this council, as in many local authorities, about what we are doing, particularly about our missing for children in care. What it doesn't talk about is that our response is, obviously, we have a very quick turnaround response if children are missing and they've been missing for coming up to sort of 12 to 24 hours and their children in care, then we have automatic strategy meetings. Sorry, was a bit colloquial. So I perhaps haven't answered some of the detail you were looking for. Happy to kind of sort of send anything that may be more help.
I think I heard a couple of actions in that, actually. I thought I heard that there's some historical information about the summer months that would be helpful to be provided, and also a little bit more detail about instances. Is it, one child who's missing 60 times or 60 children missing once each, the kind of instances, that it would be really helpful to have a note about that following the meeting, please. Yep.
Absolutely agree. And you raised one that I hadn't thought about, that it could just be that a child has been given a curfew of 7 p.m. and comes home at 7:15, and quite rightly they're reported as missing in that scenario because we should know about all those situations. It's 100% right we do that. But again, if we could get that kind of level of detail that actually 90% of these they were 15 minutes past their curfew in the summer months when it's really nice outside with their friends. Again, that's a different conversation to someone being missing for 5 days, for example. So it'd be useful to get a bit more of an understanding of a breakdown. If that's able to be shared, I appreciate there's some things that can't be in the public domain. But if we're able to have a bit more oversight of that, that would be really useful.
Thank you. I think there'd be sort of helpful assurance as to how to look at these figures for the future as well.
If that's okay to put that in the June, to bring that then to the detail to the June committee one, it would, with additional narrative, if that would be helpful. Obviously, if the numbers are very small, those things become suppressed. So we will look at obviously making sure what we can provide that doesn't cause us an issue in terms of information.
That seems reasonable. Is that acceptable? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Beckett.
It's on the same point. I wanted to focus though on those return home interviews. That seems like a great opportunity to use those insights to formulate training plans and advice that you would give to others who are carers and have caring responsibilities. Is that something that happens? And if so, is that something that we would be able to see? Because I'd be interested to learn what it is that helps reduce those numbers.
I think one of the challenges is the kind of level of detail about what we kind of sort of, are not about being able to provide, but about, thinking about the level of assurance. I mean, a return home interview, it may be helpful if we provided a copy of the template, so at least people understood what was being asked in a return home interview. As you would expect, that all of that information goes to kind of think about what needs to be in that child's kind of immediate kind of care plan, whether we need additional safety plans, whether we need to do something sort of differently. They are conducted by people who are not the social worker. So I don't know whether that people I appreciate that may not be obvious to kind of individuals here. So there is a kind of an independence to it to try and kind of gain that child's voice. One of the things that's difficult with return home interviews is sometimes the need to be consistently asking the same thing. So, for example, children who perhaps go regularly missing may not want to tell you a great deal, but it is the kind of case of, we know that if you're constant and you continue to be available for children to have those conversations, that actually it's sometimes the sixth or seventh time of asking that you'll get that information. But it's about having the people in the environments to ask that. And of course, anything that kind of comes back that's going to be relevant to how we care for that child, how we look after that child, and what they need will be kind of linked back into their plans and their work.
And is that, yeah, I think I'd understand a lot better from what you said, the intricacies of how actually, yeah, fundamentally it's the relationships they have that are more important than just the data we get from these kind of interviews. But is that information used to formulate training or advice to people with caring responsibilities wider than just those individual placements?
Yeah, so I think it's in the report that obviously the missing exploitation team kind of work with provider forum. They'll work with foster carers, around that, as you said, that broader kind of piece of training about understanding missing. What I should say as well is, because I suppose when we say missing, we imagine children just being kind of alone somewhere, sort of, at risk. A lot of our missing episodes are about children being with friends that we perhaps haven't agreed for them to kind of sort of be with at that time, or perhaps seeking to go back and see other family and friends. So we often identify, we know where they have been, but it's also about kind of working with that agreement about, where children are at certain times. So as you'd expect, like all children, we'll push boundaries, potentially sometimes do things, I'm sure a number of you are parents around what our children do. Obviously, the difference is, as a corporate parent, we will report them missing when actually, if they were your own child, you may elect to do something slightly differently. But actually, we don't do that. We have a very clear and correct low threshold around reporting missing, and then looking at that.
Thank you very much. That is really helpful. Councillor Sidlow.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Councillor Beckett jumps in on the return home interviews that I was going to ask about, but just another quick area of clarification. It's the wording is that the interview's offered to the child. It's not kind of mandatory, and the children most at risk, the ones probably putting themselves most at risk, might be likely to not take up that offer. So my concern was that they're going to get missed, and you're not going to be picking up the context that you talk about later with regards to trying to work out why these children are going missing. It's perfectly understandable for someone who's missed their curfew by 15 minutes to turn down an interview, but my concern is that other children will get missed, and you're not gathering the data that you'd later talk about using. So I was just wondering.
As you would anticipate, the people that we engage to be within missing and exploitation teams or to undertake return home interviews, we look to have those individuals who are the most tenacious and the most persistent, and who are good at that relational kind of piece. So without wandering into being oppressive with children, it is that tenacity, it is that consistency, it is coming back and continually talking to them. And it is, thinking about, if they have been offered and they have refused, we've got data on all of those things. So we've got the data on offered and refused, and we can also then follow up at later dates. But
I just wanted to add, I had the same question, and working with lots of social workers and team managers, I'm reassured by the home finding service and by our team managers and social workers that if the young person turns down the back to home interview or return home interview, that they speak with their social worker, or they speak with the provider, either the foster carer or the residential home, and the social worker will go out to visit them within a few days of them returning as well. So we cover all bases as such, so we ensure that somebody has spoken to that child.
Thank you. That's very reassuring.
Thank you very much. Unless there's any further comments or questions, are we happy to we're happy to note this report? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and also thanks to the report authors. The next two items, I believe, Martin, you are going to present these, are you not? The first one is the Corporate Performance Report, Q3, and the final one is the Risk Register. So if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm only going to pull out three of the performance indicators from the corporate performance report. The first one follows on from a conversation just now about relationships with foster carers. It's CP07, which is the number of children being cared for by our in-house foster carers, and it shows renewed improved performance after a dip. If you can see the graph, it's going back up again, which is great. And if we sustain the current level of performance, I would suggest that we review that target and make it stretch it a little bit further, so that our fostering teams can continue to strive as hard as they can to recruit more foster carers. That is something they're doing all the time as business as usual, and we have a number of foster carers and kinship carers in the assessment process at the moment. As we've already heard, the good news about having more and more children placed with in-house carers is that we know that outcomes for those children are better. We have more stable placements, better educational outcomes, and stronger relationships. So I'm really pleased by that indicator. We've got a long way to go till it's up into the 70s, 80s, and 90%, but it's better than it's been for a long time, and that's good news. The only red indicator is CP09, which I can see Sarah's ready for, and that's the percentage of 2-year-olds eligible for 15-hour entitlement that attend a preschool setting. So I'll finish my next one, and then I'll ask Sarah just to comment on that, if that's okay. Finally, because it is another education one, actually, finally, CPYP18 shows the year-on-year growth of children being electively home educated. And that's been in the report for quite some time, and it's an annually updated number. So you might think, why am I drawing attention to it now? Well, in the children's, we know that those numbers are accelerating nationally. They're growing considerably locally. But in the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, the legislation, when it's introduced, will have a requirement for local authorities to retain a register of children that are being educated at home. So whilst that's growing, it will be a new function for us to have a clear register of who those children are, where they are, and what education they're getting. So that's the reason I draw your attention to that. But before we take questions, if it's okay if I ask Sarah to comment on CP09 or CYP09.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, so the percentage of 2-year-olds eligible for the 15-hour entitlement has dropped from 73.2% to 67.39%. But last year we were actually, for the first time, above national for this indicator. So the position is that this is a indicator that has dropped nationally due to the expansion of the childcare offer. So the funding that is provided to early years providers to support the 2-year-old offer, a lot of providers are struggling to be able to support that with the funding allocation. And because of the expanded childcare offer, where we've seen an increase for for children between 9 months and to 5 to have a universal offer for 30 hours of free childcare. They've kind of been bumped out by the, it's more lucrative for some providers to support that wider childcare offer. So we have got a targeted plan. We still have to recognise that we are above national, and when comparing Cambridgeshire in terms of our statistical neighbours, we have moved from 10 out of 11 to 5th out of 11 in 2025. So despite the fact that it's highlighted red, it's actually compared to national and improving. It's a positive position, but obviously we want to do a lot more because children do benefit from that quality childcare in their early years. So there is a full monitoring plan that is monitored within Best Start in Life, and we've got targeted programmes in areas of low uptake, particularly in March, Charteris and Ely, and we've got marketing materials targeted at those families, and we've shifted our approach so that families understand the benefits of that childcare offer. So we're working really hard to improve and sustain our position in terms of take-up of the 2-year-old offer. But just to put into context, comparatively, although it's highlighted red, it is actually quite a good position compared to national.
Thank you very much. So I've got Councillor Goodliffe and Councillor Tong.
Thank you. Firstly, on CYP 007, Martin, you missed a trick naming that one. In terms of foster children with in-house carers, can you tell us about whether or not kinship carers are included in those numbers, and how the numbers of kinship carers are possibly increasing with the changes to the allowances and that kind of side of it? And then looking at 0-18, electively home educated children, do we have any information on how many of those children have additional SEND needs and have been taken out of mainstream or taken out of school by parents and carers, please?
I'll answer the first question. So yes, I think that does include all of our foster carers, kinship carers, and our mainstream foster carers in that cohort. Regarding CYP 18, Sarah, do you want to pick that up?
Thank you. I will get you the data, Councillor Goodliffe. We do have to, obviously, where there is heightened risk for those young people, we do have to have targeted support. And I know that there is a disproportionate amount of children with special educational needs. And I think the register that Martin alluded to, where we'll have to have, visibility on all of those children, will support our approach to that. But I can share after the meeting the breakdown, the profile of that group.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tong, then Councillor Damery-Homan.
Hello. Also want to thank officers for this report. I do think it's very good. And, well, to return to the subject of EHCP plans, which has already been discussed quite a bit today, I was just looking at CYP 05, and quite a lot of the talk today has resonated with me and something I've been thinking about, which is in relation to the fact that the percentage of EHBC assessments we do is only one vector of success when it comes to looking at the completion of assessments within that time frame. Because the other thing we want to ensure is there isn't, for instance, one child that keeps on getting pushed to the back of the queue endlessly. I think we also want to think about things like the mean amount of time that people are waiting to undergo assessment. And for me, it would be really useful if in future we could perhaps elaborate on this a bit more, include something about that. What is the mean amount of time people are waiting? Perhaps, the kind of, sorry, I'm very tired, the term eludes me. What is the highest amount of time versus the lowest amount of time that a child is waiting? I'd really like to have kind of that spectrum, just because I think it gives us a bit more of a accurate view on exactly how we're doing as an authority. Even though I think the information we've got here so far is good, I just think we can do a bit better because it's something people are obviously so interested in.
Thank you. I think we alluded earlier to the new early years and education system, and we have been compromised to a certain extent in terms of the level of data that we can provide, but it's a much improved position, and we're working on a send data dashboard in a subgroup to the Inclusion for All board. So we have shared an early version with the chair and vice chair, and it is an improving position in terms of the breakdown. But we will take on board your comments, and probably in a future update we can give more granular analysis about the timescales as you've described.
That's fantastic. Sorry, just wanted to add my thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Damry-Homan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at CYP 12, and I appreciate that this hasn't been updated in a while, but I'm just, can you clarify what is correct here? Because the commentary says we've had no inspections since the last report, so our figures have remained the same. But in our little indicator area in the top left, it says that we've had a nigh on 4% drop and we're heading downwards. What should we be listening to of those two options, please?
So we have had so firstly, all of our secondary schools are academies, and the inspection framework itself has changed. Sorry, I was looking the wrong way there. So our inspection framework has actually changed. So we don't have the same one-word judgments. There's 5 different areas of focus within the inspection, and then there's a separate safeguarding focus, which is basically just met or not met. So it is a declining position, but actually I think we probably need to review this indicator in light of the change in the school inspection framework, because it's much more difficult now to make comparisons because obviously the focus of the inspection framework itself has shifted. So I think it's fair comment, and we probably need to review in light of that change how we then present this information.
I think that'd be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sidlow.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask about the pupils electively home educated, and it's down as contextual, which makes sense, but it says increasing is in green, which would suggest it's going the right way. At what point would we be concerned? Is my question.
I think we are concerned. I think that elective home education is interesting because obviously it's within, parents, carers can choose to electively home educate, and the legislation around that allows them to do that, and the local authority has limited oversight. However, as Martin's alluded to, I think within the changes that we referred to in the earlier report, there is an expectation that the local authority will have a register for vulnerable children. So all children who are not accessing their educational entitlement, which includes electively home educated children. And I think the reason we need to be concerned is, and it goes back to Councillor Goodliffe's challenge earlier, is around the profile of that group. So if it is a case whereby parents are making the choice because it works for them and they're getting access to a really good education, then obviously that's positive. However, what we do know is that there may be children who are perhaps being encouraged to consider elective home education as a route for them, where perhaps the significance of their needs are challenging for schools to support. So I think it's fair to say that we are concerned about that number. It's not unique to Cambridgeshire, it's growing nationally, and I think that that's what's informed the register that Martin's just alluded to. So I think the takeaway is to do that profile across that group to give us that reassurance that where there is heightened risk, that we are having a multi-agency response to that risk.
So off the back of that, the percentage of 2-year-olds eligible for 15-hour entitlement, that's specifically a higher is better category. However, surely the same contextual arguments would apply to that. So why don't we consider that contextually rather than just higher or lower?
I'm not 100% sure I'm following you. I'm so sorry.
So if parents are just choosing to keep their children out of the 15-hour free education because they would rather have them at home, it's what they want to do. In the same way, parents can choose to electively home educate when they're older. Why is that also not considered contextual? It might skew the numbers.
Thank you. Thanks for the clarification. That's really helpful. It's quite different. So the targeted 2-year-old offer is targeted towards those children who research tells us would benefit most from accessing quality education. So we know that if children are able to do that early on, then their outcomes are more positive as they continue through their educational journey. So it's a targeted approach because we know it adds value. So it's quite different in terms of the elective home education, which is shifting, as I've just described, but the legislation around elective home education has always been that it is within a parent's gift to choose whether they want to electively home educate their children. So I think they're quite different in their intentions, because targeted 2-year-olds is a targeted national campaign to support those children that would, by targeting them to access that education, they're going to arrive at school ready, and they will contribute to that best start in life policy that we've referred to in the earlier report.
So finally, I understand that's targeted, but all children are entitled to a certain number of hours after the age of 3. Is that correct? So why don't we monitor those children and whether they're attending a nursery or any kind of childcare? It seems to be a bit of a gap because we're doing it when they get to school, and we're doing it for the at-risk kids from 2, but we're not doing it for those children in the middle.
So probably the easiest way I can describe it is, so in a similar way where schools get additional funding for children eligible for free school meals, because there is a correlation with that. I mean, it's not a direct correlation, but there is a correlation between children who are eligible for free school meals and their outcomes. In the same way, for the targeted 2-year-old offer, the profile of children that are eligible for that targeted support, we know would massively benefit from that childcare offer. So that's why there's much more intense scrutiny on the outcomes for that group rather than the universal group, because we know that if we can make a difference for those children earlier on, they will progress and have better outcomes as they go through their educational journey.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack, you sure? Okay, thank you. Councillor Tong and then Councillor Beckett.
Sorry for bouncing back to me again. Now the topic of electively home educated children has been brought up, I've been very interested in this discussion, and it's caused me to think about this from an angle I hadn't really thought about before. Something I wanted to ask is, what work has been done to find out why there's an uptick in children that are being electively home educated? Have we asked families why they're choosing this option? The other thing I would be really interested in knowing is, well, you're looking at the flat rate of the number of children known to be electively home educated. How does this connect to the population growth of our area? Is it particularly surprising considering the fact we're having a lot more people? Is this amount disproportionate to a number of people that are choosing to live and work in Cambridge now? I'd be really interested in getting that perspective.
I think probably what would be most helpful, which is, in response to Councillor Goodliffe's question earlier, is if we do a brief update, a briefing on the profile of the children that are electively home educated, because it's a balance. We do have well-established forums with the parents and carers that choose to electively home educate, but then there's a growing profile of children that perhaps have more risk attached to them. So I think probably the most useful thing would be to pull together that briefing and circulate it to committee.
Can I say, I think that would be fantastic. I think this is a topic that would really do with a bit more exploration.
Thank you. That would be really helpful. Councillor Beckett.
On the indicator CYP 009, eligibility for the 15-hour entitlement, do we have any existing take-up data for that 15-hour entitlement or the new 30-hour entitlement? And I've got a follow-up as well, if that's all right after that.
So in terms of the take-up for the targeted twos, that's the statistic that's included within the performance report. But I think you might be asking for a breakdown by, or am I following that correctly? Because the data that we've provided is the percentage of eligible children who take up that offer.
No, so I realised I read that. I thought that was a national statistic and we hadn't actually got the data for us yet. But I'm reading it again. It seems like that is what we're expecting to see when you've fully
Yeah.
reported on it, right?
Yeah, so it's 67%, I think, within the report. I think we said that it had declined. Yeah, so the current percentage of 2-year-olds eligible for the 15-hour entitlement shows a decline from 73.2 to 67.39. But when I was talking earlier, what I was describing was this is a national decline, and actually our position is not declining at the same rate as a number of our regional comparators. So although we have a targeted programme to improve it, we still do perform well, but that's not to say that we don't have more work to do, and we have got a targeted campaign to improve that uptake.
If I may follow up, this is all speculative because this has been reported to me by residents, but there have been concerns raised to me that some providers increase fees for certain additional activities, keepsakes, and kind of workarounds to try and increase the profits so that they can basically pay for their staff, I think. And I know that that isn't allowed, but what do we do to proactively try and stop that from happening to protect parents to be able to afford this, without guilt tripping them into feeling that they have to pay the extra to get that keepsake or ensure that their children are included in additional activities?
So there isn't, the providers are not allowed to do what you're describing. So if there are instances where you're made aware that that is happening, obviously we would want to look into that. We do have a relationship with all of our providers because obviously we have to allocate the funding in response to the take-up, and that process is very thorough. But if there are instances where you have been made aware of situations such as that, we would obviously want to investigate because that is not in line with the use of funding.
I may just come back through you, Chair. I found that out actually, and I know the process for doing that. My question was, do we do anything proactive to inspect or to just kind of find out for ourselves whether these situations occur?
Well, there's very clear criteria around what that funding can be spent on and what it cannot be spent on, and we monitor the allocation of funding. And so if there was anything that was of concern, we would definitely look to interrogate that because it's not in line with the use of the grant.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. That's a very, very helpful report. If we may look at item 9 then.
Yep, absolutely. Just let me get my notes. So Item 9 is the Children Education and Families Risk Register. The risk register was updated earlier this month. You'll see the review date. None of the risks have increased and none of the risks have decreased in that review. The action plans have all been reviewed and updated, and we plan to review these risks again before the 7th of July. But there's been no changes since it was last here at committee, so happy to take any questions.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to raise exactly the same thing I raised last time round. I'm going to continue to raise it until either we get a sufficient answer or it's changed, to be honest, because I'm still surprised that risk 1 and 2 sit at 20 and not 25. How is the likelihood at a 5 but a consequence of 4? So just for context, other risks that sit at a 4 on consequences are not delivering eyes and being unable to manage demand and workload. But we're saying that not being able to deliver SEND on our statutory timelines, the financial risk of the safety valve, etc., DSG spend, and not being able to deliver our services full stop within our financial allocations, I don't see how that isn't a 5 consequence, especially as the likelihood is also sat at a 5. So I'm going to continue to raise it until either we get a satisfactory response on why it is only sat at a 4 on consequences, or it's changed, because the risk to this organisation of us failing because we don't have enough money, I think, is quite stark at the moment. We're not quite at a 114 notice yet, but there are many authorities that are. We aren't far behind. I know there are changes coming down the line, but I want some real reassurances that what we've got here is correct, because I don't think personally that it is, considering the outlook that we all know is the case in Cambridgeshire.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and happy to incorporate that into our review in July. I'm wondering, you're correct about the consequences being 5 if we're unable to deliver our services. I wonder if the likelihood should be 4 and the consequence should be 5. It would give us a similar metric, but it would reflect the concern that you've raised it previously about whether this is accurately representing the consequences that would happen if that did fail. So I will incorporate those comments into the review in July.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, fully accepting, Martin, that the position hasn't changed. I'm just curious as to why. We've got 6 measurements on here, the last measured in December, and the critically curious brain that I have could tell me that that means that we've made no improvement in any of these 6 areas. We haven't gone backwards either, but 2 of these areas are in red. And I'm just saying, why has there been no improvement? If you look at the current scores and the previous scores, they're absolutely identical in every measurement.
Yeah, that's what I reflected in my opening comments, that they were reviewed and none of them have increased and none of them have decreased. They stayed exactly the same. And I think we could go through each of them. Let me think of a good example to explain the position. So if we look at the risk of harm to vulnerable children and young people increasing, so that was higher previously. We have over time reduced that. That's risk number 3. So we have over time reduced that. Again, acknowledging that the consequences would be significant. So the consequences are 5, but the likelihood has dropped over time, not in this review, and probably it was 15 in the last review. But these risks are slow to reduce in my mind. We still have a significant way to go on our improvement. We're still rated as requires improvement at our last Ofsted inspection. Subsequent inspections have noted some improvements, but we're still operating, and we've reduced our caseloads for our social workers, so we know that people's workload is more manageable. It's still not very manageable. So there are a number of factors which will take a long time to decrease, and that is echoed through all of these risks. So they are reviewed meaningfully. We do look at them. We do look at the action plans, and we do consider whether they're having an impact or whether they're not. Some of them are rated as good. Some of them, some of the actions are rated as reasonable. And the action plans, if you as you go through them, they do address, in my mind, they do address the work that we're doing to improve outcomes, not just on this measure, but on every single one of those. So I accept that it is frustrating to see risks that move slowly, and months or quarters like this where we don't see any change at all in any of them. Equally frustrating for me, but I think it's for me to be honest about what I think is the risk and the slow trajectory.
So if I may just come back on that, and I totally accept your answer on that, Martin. If I may, the expectation would be that we should see, as a result of our action plans being implemented, some positive change either in next quarter or the quarter afterwards at the very least.
I would hope so, yeah. But also, as I know that you're not suggesting we are, but we're not clairvoyant, so things may deteriorate, and some of these risks, despite the action plans, may also either stay the same or deteriorate. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. Councillor Goodliff.
Thank you. Just to follow on from what Martin's saying, I guess risk number 2 is going to change quite significantly, in that the financial risk of the safety valve will not entirely disappear, but 90% of it will disappear once we have our grant funding. I assume that risk will then be re-rated to remove that financial part of it, but obviously there will still be a high risk with the SEND statutory timetables and that kind of thing. So it will be a rewritten risk. And at that point, I guess, the number to be determined.
I would say yes, and I would say no. I think we don't really understand fully the total, the small print of what that grant funding is going to look like. We don't know yet what's going to happen to the money once, if our plan's accepted and payment is made, then we don't know what the clear plan is for future years. So that could be a number that is reduced at one point and then just builds up. It might be that that isn't the case, and the Department of Education is very clear when they give us that outcome that it's going to reduce, that they're going to make that same outcome year on year. But yes, you're right. Whatever the outcome is, it will be reflected in this risk.
Thank you. Councillor Edge, then Councillor Manning.
So, kind of on a similar point to Bryony's, we've spoken about the register and lack of movement within it. I think on that second point, I think to me it doesn't make sense that you've got those two things coupled, because one of them is about cost and the risk that comes with that, and the other one is about an ongoing risk with the EHCPs essentially, and they're both substantial, and I think they should be separated. We have kind of had separate conversations to kind of look at this register again, and kind of envisage how it may be written differently to kind of give kind of more clarity on mitigations, for instance, and other things.
Thank you. Councillor Manning.
You've got a risk in there in the first section around implementation of eyes, which you were talking about earlier. Is that just a generic, we're bringing in a new system risk, or is there something more detailed around data and concerns there? I can understand either could be the answer.
I'm just trying to find where you are in the report.
Oh, so it's just in the I'm looking in the actual appendix bit where it just mentions under the unable to deliver services within the financial allocation, it's got delays and triggers delays in the implementation of the eyes system, and references across.
I mean, so the financial implications of delays in the implementation of eyes will be significant for the council. So it's just if that were to happen, it's there to reference that as a trigger rather than that's something that is going to happen. It's just what would be accounted as a trigger.
Thank you very much. hopefully the next time we look at this risk register, we'll be looking at some really updated and improved risks reflecting change of circumstances and more. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you, Martin. Unless there's any further comments, can we please move then on to the agenda plan, training plan and appointments? Are there any further updates to the agenda plan?
Not currently, no.
No, thank you. Are there any comments on the training plan? Oh, I'm so sorry.
I think we've had a really excellent meeting today with some good debate, but it's 5:10. I'm looking at the one for 23rd of June, and that's a considerably bigger, looks a considerably bigger agenda item menu than we've got for today. I don't know whether I'm speaking whether we possibly could, but could we consider a 1 o'clock start instead of a 2, or is there any way around that?
I think we're going to look at that. We're going to look at it.
Okay, I'll leave it with you.
Thank you. Any other comments before I move hastily on to the next item? Okay. Any comments on the training plan? No. Thank you very much. Note the governor's appointments for January to March 2026 were attached to the agenda at Appendix 2. And with that, that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much indeed for attending.